have no idea where this will lead us, but I have a definite feeling it will be a place both wonderful and strange.
Hello, and welcome to the wonderful and strange Twin Peaks Logcast. I'm Kalil, and with me today is the red light bulb to my blue tomorrow.
Stop! Stop! Stop!
Today we're talking about Inland Empire, David Lynch's 2006 movie. Content warnings are in order for this film because it's got some serious stuff in it. There is sort of a psychological component to this film where it has a lot of depersonalization, derealization, that if you're sensitive to those sort of topics, you may want to avoid this film. It operates almost like a hypnosis session that for some viewers can take them out of themselves in the viewing. There are also, in addition, domestic abuse, murder, abortion, sex work, and other related mental health topics. So just be aware before checking out Inland Empire. There are some potential things about it.
Yes, it absolutely has some very interesting graphic moments, including one with a screwdriver inside of your abdomen. So viewer discretion.
Not your personally abdomen. It's a
potentially yours.
No.
Like
it doesn't stab the first
viewers
person.
could have been the person stabbed. Okay, we can't leave out everybody. So there is a 1 in 7 billionth chance that that person is listening right now. So yes,
I'm going to operate in the assumption it's not that person. Yeah.
If you are that person,
yes.
Email us.
So, spoilers are in order for this podcast. We may cover any and all David Lynch work prior to Inland Empire, including all of Twin Peaks if we so feel like it.
Every single thing comes down to this.
Trivia sources for today include IMDb, Wikipedia, 25 Years Later, Inland Empire Wiki, AV Club, and the blog of Pliskin Boone.
Right. The blog of Pliskin Boone. Everyone knows about the blog of Pliskin Boone. People have been searching for the blog of Pliskin Boone since the creation of the internet.
Needs no introduction. Before we get started here, I did get an email from a listener of the podcast who gave us some useful information following our podcast on rabbits and Dumbland.
Okay.
They answered our question regarding how much David Lynch's website service had cost originally in 2002 and thereabouts. So if you don't recall or maybe missed out on that episode, David Lynch had a website service going on, sort of like your subscription services now with Netflix, where you'd pay monthly to have access to the videos he's putting out, including the Dumbland episodes and the Rabbits episodes, among other different material. The listener in question said that when they were looking into the service themselves, I don't think they actually purchased it, but they had talked about at one point considering purchasing it. The David Lynch website charge was $15 a month to be part of it.
Now, mind you, $15 now versus $15 in 2002, that's going to be about as far as what inflation from in2013dollars.com says.
In 2013? Why that year?
We're
looking at 2002.
Calculator.
We're looking at 2002.
Yes, I know,
Okay.
but it still is the same website.
Sure.
The value $15 from 2002 to 2022, that would be worth $24.11.
Okay. So $24 a month, roughly speaking in current money.
Yes.
To be able to view the latest episodes of Rabbits in Dumbland.
Yes.
Presumably other shorts that he may have had the licensing and rights to display on his website.
However much could be potentially out at that time and however his upload schedule was.
So what do you think of that charge? Because we had speculated that maybe this would cost like $5 a month or something.
Yeah, no, we were way off.
We were way off. What do you think about this charge?
Scary. Like that is a lot of change, if you will, for any sort of subscription. Even when you come down to even print subscriptions.
I think of things like now we have Patreon, right? It's very unlikely for most people to pay $25 a month for a creator on Patreon. You can. There are certainly those who do, but most people who do Patreon pay a few dollars a month. I mean, I know for myself, I'll pay maybe $1 to $5 for a creator I want to support and get some content. I don't typically do $25 for one creator who might be giving us maybe a Dumbland or a Rabbids a month sort of deal. So I do think this is overcharging. Dumbland, he made on his own on a computer. He really didn't have a staff he had to pay.
Yes.
And the programs themselves, I don't think it would have cost a lot of money to run those or purchase those, considering what he was working with Flash. I could be wrong. I could be mistaken. Maybe there was a lot of cost associated. But I would assume Dumbland did not cost much to produce. And Rabbids, he made in his own backyard. And I don't know how much Scott Coffey, Naomi Watts, and Haring were charging for their services for those few episodes, but I'm guessing it wouldn't have taken that much time to actually shoot. Considering the type of dialogue it is, the dialogue's done after the fact. And it doesn't necessarily need a lot of takes because the delivery is so stilted and raw. I don't think that would have taken very much money either as far as production. Even with paying the actors, he made most of it on site in his backyard. He didn't really have to rent anything. So I am inclined to say that this is a large fee for what he was providing.
It's a lot of money. That is, at the very least, 3.5 spoil me meals for myself.
So I'm glad that this material is now available online and other sources, is all I'm going to say. Because if we add up those $15 a month charges over the few months it would take to finish Dumbland, I don't think you'd be paying that money for it. So Inland Empire is the last David Lynch film of current date. He might still make one in the future, but as of 2022, there is no other David Lynch film right now. There were some rumors around the Cannes Film Festival of this year that he was supposed to debut a secret film, and those rumors turned out to not be valid.
Or maybe it was just that secret.
There are flotations around of a possible series, in and out with Netflix, we don't know, but this is his last film, the most recent film as of date. And it kind of is a culmination of a lot of his other works.
It very much like it, more so than usual.
More so than usual. You've talked about a lot of David Lynch's films feel very similar or almost responding to each other.
Yes.
This one, again, even more than usual. I will go and immediately say my bias that this is my favorite David Lynch film. It is my favorite David Lynch anything. I would give this a perfect 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10. And I would not give anything else with David Lynch that rating.
I'm happy for you.
So I will say going in as well, I totally understand why someone would hate this movie. This is the most not for everyone David Lynch film I think he's ever made.
Agreed.
It's a hard sell. It is 3 hours long, has almost no plot to hold on to, almost no main characters to really identify with or understand. It's 3 hours of losing reality and 3 hours of being put through very confusing scene changes from one time period of Poland to a modern time period here. What's a set and what's reality, slowly merging with rabbits being thrown in interspliced.
Yeah. No,
it is a hard sell.
Full on rabbits. Like, it's not like the whole series. It's just more so certain moments in rabbits as well as a few additional scenes with rabbits.
So
it's a good old rabbit time.
I love Inland Empire for the aesthetic. I first watched David Lynch's films a few years ago. I got a great deal on eBay for like $200 for all the David Lynch films. And what I did is I watched a few of them, and I remember for sure Inland Empire. I don't remember how many other ones. But Inland Empire, I viscerally remember the first day I ever saw it. Because it was at night. I want to say it was around like 10 o'clock at night. In my room, and I slept on a mattress on the floor, because that's what my lifestyle was like at that time.
Yeah.
And I was watching it on a portable DVD player, a low-grade, cheap portable DVD player. I was lying on my side on my bed, watching it on the floor from this tiny screen, and it just controlled me. It was 3 hours of being sucked into another world. I know you mentioned when you saw Fire Walk With Me the first time, made you pace around the room. I wasn't pacing, but I definitely felt like I had been transported. Something had happened to me during those 3 hours watching it on this tiny little screen. And while most David Lynch films, yeah, we can make the meme about how you shouldn't watch them on a phone, that does not count as a replacement, etc., etc., Inland Empire is the best case for watching a movie on a terrible quality portable DVD player while you're in bed, because this movie really fit that mood. The already like low resolution on the camera quality of this film was made even darker, even more like graphically confused and aliased and distorted and twisted by the nature of this cheap DVD player, further distancing me from reality of it.
Now, perhaps you could say that you went through a door, And suddenly a reflection had been created, and evil was introduced to the world.
And that's the professor. That's the origin story of the professor. He is my shadow. I watched Inland Empire, and then a door was open. What did you think of Inland Empire, your first time viewing it, and then your second time viewing it for the notes?
This film, I'm going to come forward and say that I'm going to be taking this a bit more, probably like dissecty, if you will.
Dissecty.
Yes, dissecty. It's my favorite. It's my favorite of the dwarf characters from Snow White.
Yep.
You know.
Yep. Oh, that smell of formaldehyde.
It's dissecty again. It's sad what Doc had to do to him. But anyway.
Continue.
This film itself, I find to be very much taking a character from something such as a piece and throwing them through a case of identity crisis as well as through chaos by putting them in the place of the character, the actor, as well as the audience interpretation throughout the entire film. This is the way that I have viewed the film.
So, and when you say a piece, you mean like a film script?
Like a film script, if you will. A character from a film script. As if like this film script is being rewritten, it is being remade, it is being handled in a new way, it is being taken by different minds. It is something in which this person is being batted around like they were a fictional character, made realized, and became sentient, and then put them into a Silent Hill adjacent scenario. With that being said, there's not many quirky things with this film, I will say.
It's not a funny film.
It's not a funny film, and it's not something in which, say, for example, there'll be instances or aspects that I can meme on or just joke on or laugh on. This is something that I watched through and took very seriously throughout the viewing. So
this is probably the hardest David Lynch film to call a comedy.
Yes. Now, mind you, I think that for the most part, it has a tone of horror in it that I can see can grasp people. But like someone who kind of like sees things coming inside of a horror film, or at the very least can get the vibe and see where like the cinematography is guiding the overall viewer, I'm in that space like stepped away from the screen, if you will.
So you understand it but don't feel it.
I understand it, but I don't feel it. I've got a little bit of distance onto it. I can come to respect it in that overall stake, but I will say that this one has been the least involved with me in a passionate sense or a emotional sense where I'm able to connect. And maybe it is that difference between, say, for example, following certain characters in somewhat of an idea of a story, like how even if the timeline was mixed up in Mulholland Drive, I was still able to link onto individual characters. It feels like a 3-hour sequence of the one jump scare scene from Mulholland Drive where I just see this like strange crab man walk from the alley out to the side and it's like boom. But
it doesn't really do anything.
It doesn't
to
do
you.
anything for you. It's like, okay.
You can admire that it was shot well, that it was interesting visually. You could say that the timing of it and everything was good, but it doesn't really work on you. Meanwhile, I'm over here rolling over here in the filth that is Inland Empire, rubbing Inland Empire under all my armpits, under my knee pits,
I have to get
into
myself
my
cleaned
mouth.
after Dumbland, so
the best
I'm too scrubbed up right
The
now.
best thing is a
Squeaky
mud
clean.
bath of Inland Empire after Dumbland. You go right into the filth.
Nah, I'm good. I think I'm good.
I love Inland Empire. And like, that's where my bias comes in.
Yeah.
I do believe that this is a film that resists having one interpretation. I think, like Mulholland Drive, one of the potential strengths of this movie is its openness to interpretations that vary. I think the more confident someone is that they have the answer, the more I disagree with their approach to this film, I guess. Like, to me, that's a lot of the beauty of Inland Empire and Mulholland Drive, is that it allows people to imprint and relate to it in very different ways. And as long as they can back it up with evidence from the film, that is completely valid. So I don't necessarily share your view of the main thing of Inland Empire being the fictional character brought to life and being further meddled with by different cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. Too many cooks, right?
Yeah.
But I do think it's a very entertaining read, and I do think it's illustrative of certain ideas. A lot of readings of Inland Empire that take one thing to be the whole situation.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it being the whole situation. I don't think the entire experience can be defined for me. But I find that a lot of those interpretations that say, this is it, I find it interesting what they reveal about the other aspects of the work. And what I mean by that is, even though I don't necessarily agree with your approach to the film overall, I do think it goes a long way to show the potential mindset David Lynch was in when he made Inland Empire in the first place.
I mean, I think that I wouldn't be as convinced if it weren't for the fact that some of the overall characters that have been cast in the film from his previous works are in relatively similar scenarios.
Right.
And being cast in relatively similar ways. There's the fact that even in the end, when we're seeing even more characters handled like that, we get What Did Jack Do's monkey as well as the sawing.
I mean, the What Did Jack Do would come out later.
What Jack Do would come out later. That monkey has been used before, though, multiple times. That monkey is part of the David Lynch cast
kind of
at this point.
situation, yeah.
Judy kind of situation. I swear it was a freaking bunny. But
In Rabbits, you mean?
yeah, in Rabbits. But also the fact that we're literally sawing logs off to the side, which takes me to Industrial Symphony.
Yes.
There's so much of this in which I'm looking at like all these independent pieces, and it seems too large, if you will, from what David Lynch has already been like kind of putting forward with things such as lights and the electricity, that I feel like there might be some form of intentionality. I could be wrong, but I feel like there's some intentionality with it.
And what I think your reading of the film helps reveal is, again, that mindset that Lynch was in when he made this, because at this point in his career, he was pretty disillusioned with working on big productions with studios.
Yeah.
Mulholland Drive had worked out well, but he'd had bad experiences, obviously, with Dune in the 80s, and more recently with Twin Peaks, feeling that the golden goose had been killed by revealing Laura Palmer's situation. The film Fire Walk With Me had largely flopped, even though he might have liked the result of it. Audiences weren't necessarily sold on it. So he had success with Mulholland Drive, but it wasn't quite enough to keep him enamored with the studio system, with the mainstream way of making films. And a lot of the way that he spoke about the internet at the turn of the century, when we were looking at Dumbland and Rabbits and sort of the special features that are out there, David Lynch seemed to view the internet as kind of this freeing zone where people could express ideas outside of those official channels. And he could use his website as a way to keep a revenue stream going to fund these more independent projects. He would get mad at his neighbor for not liking having his backyard be the studio. But there's, again, this idea throughout all of that early 2000s David Lynch commentary that he wanted to try to branch out and do his own thing more independently with more control than what he ever could get with a studio meddling. So if we do take Inland Empire to be a story of a script that got way out of hand because people were messing with it, it's a remake of a remake of a remake. Nobody knows what they're doing. Everything is chaotic. The characters are coming to life and being twisted and being maneuvered. Yeah, that does feel like Lynch's frustrations potentially coming out with what studios can do to a film and how things can be lost, how the dream can be lost with a film the more there's cooks in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
So is that an apt way to maybe compare to what you're getting at?
I think that is an apt way of viewing it, yes.
And there's actually quite a bit of interesting information out there on the creation of Inland Empire and sort of its origin point that, as a super fan of Inland Empire, was very interesting to read upon.
Okay.
So 25 years later, had an interview with John Neff, who had worked with David Lynch in the sound department on a few different projects, including Inland Empire, which he left partway through.
Oh.
But John Neff shared some information about the project.
Mm-hmm.
He said, quote, "In July of 2003, so again, we're talking 1 year after Dumbland and Rabbits, so just finished up.
Very well.
David came to me and said we were going to do a project called A Meeting Upstairs for the website. Laura Dern is going to play the prominent part. One of the guys that worked in the office was going to play God. David wanted to shoot Laura coming up the stairs, this big, long set of cement stairs going up the studio. Then, when she got there, she was going to record this 18-page monologue that we would then cut up into 5-minute segments to put on the web. It was about her. She's dead, but she doesn't know it. She's confessing her sins and trying to explain away all the bad things she did in her life." So, just taking a break from that quote, that immediately reminds me of a particular part of Inland Empire. Does it remind you of a particular part of Inland Empire?
Not specifically. Which part are you thinking?
I am talking about Laura Dern going up the steps to talk to Mr. K, the individual at the desk, and although it is not presented as one monologue, we do have her continuously talking with very little interruption throughout the film to that individual.
Okay, I see. So would you interpret this individual to be potentially God in a prescript or a
I think that at one point, David Lynch may have intended that at the start.
Okay.
But again, death of the author in mind, I think that even if that was the intention, that doesn't mean it's the only thing limiting our interpretation.
Yes.
I just think it's interesting anecdotally that if John Neff here is to be believed here, which I would assume yes, David Lynch originally had the idea of Laura Dern's character having been dead, confessing things to God. And that was the idea of this situation. The only area I guess I'd be a little bit questioning on is it surprised me that David Lynch would tell even the sound designer that's what it was about. Because David Lynch is so secretive about what his intentions are. But if we're going to go with it, I think it might have started that way and then maybe became other things.
Yes.
Although if you want to view this as the character died and this is confessing her sins, at the end of Inland Empire, we do see Nikki/Sue shoot someone who takes on her face. So you could interpret the idea that this is someone who died and time is being messed up and the stuff that's at the stairs could be talking to God still. Maybe, maybe not. At the end of making this, John Neff says that David Lynch had said, well, I'm effed, saying the actual F word. He didn't say effed, he said the actual word.
Fucked.
And we were all moved to tears by her performance. It was so phenomenal. We said to Dave, what are you talking about? This is tremendous. This will be great. And then he goes, I know. It's too good for the web. Now I've got to do something else with it.
It's too... Okay.
So supposedly...
It has to be true.
Yes.
Ow.
This is the exact turning point at which David Lynch said he's going to make him, right? He's like, I've been making things for my website for $15 a month, but this is a bit too good for that. And then pivots. Okay, continuing with John Neff, quote, he had another idea for a series called Axon Inn.
Okay.
INN, like a hotel. It involved this woman who watched this industrial shop across the street. She was agoraphobic and wouldn't go outside of the building. She saw people walk into this building but never saw them come out of it. Her curiosity got the best of her, so she went across the street finally, and the door said Axon Inn on it in handwritten letters. She walked inside.
Well, that makes sense because there's no axon out.
Makes perfect sense. She walked inside, turned left, and she was a different person in a different life. The whole series was going to be this thing where this woman is constantly waking up in different lives, but without an ending. Again, more seeds for what would later become Inland Empire, very transparently. I think the use of Axon Inn being like a place she stays living in, but also, again, the idea of inside, like you said, there's no Axon out. Rooms within rooms. There's something to that. David Lynch seems to have a fixation with apartments and hotels and the idea of these sort of temporary residences that can become more long-term.
Yes.
So there's something to that I think is, I think it's pretty interesting. John Neff continues, quote, so he had a meeting upstairs, and then he had Axon Inn, which also was set to star Laura Dern and Justin Theroux. We just got started shooting scene by scene without an ending in sight. There was no script. He'd write a scene, we would shoot a scene, and then he'd work with it on the computer. He did most of the editing on Inland Empire himself. Weeks would go by without shooting anything new, and then he would say to us he had a scene. We were working to work the next night. He'd pay us some overtime, and we'd shoot the thing. So...
Good thing it's overtime, because
Good thing
that's
you're
our
being paid
hectic
overtime.
schedule.
But it is all off the cuff. It is all just as it happens. You could go weeks not knowing where it's going, and then all of a sudden, here's more. Let's go. All contingent upon that. There was another film, a 2002 short film called Darkened Room, that I also was seeing referenced as an origin point for Inland Empire. And I did take a look at that short film. It's like 8 minutes long. You can find it on the Internet Archive, available for free. And it's basically this person kind of with a little bit of like almost a broken English kind of accent. She is Asian. Very similar to the street person in Inland Empire, kind of reminding me of it.
I remember.
And she's talking about this friend that she has, and then it'll eventually, the short film cuts to that friend who's crying, and her makeup is, running down. The black makeup's running down from her tears, and she's talking for a while, and then someone else enters the room who seems to have power over her in this scenario. And there's a sort of constant sense of dread. It is shot very similar to Inland Empire in terms of this low resolution, low quality, like home camera. So you have this sort of idea of David Lynch taking all these different short projects that he was working on and just eventually stringing them along, some either like literally being in there like rabbits, and then some being like spiritually tied in to future ideas and reworked and the whole thing was just on this fly remixing process.
It's very much a collage from the sound of it, especially when it comes down to even some of the other reference short film works there. So any sort of like pieces could potentially be glued onto the canvas, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. The way that it was presented to Laura Dern is that one time she got a phone call with David Lynch, and the way that she remembers it is David asked her, "Do you want to come and experiment?" And that was the opening.
And that's when David Lynch put her on the collage physically on the paper. It's like, there, now it's perfect. And then they walked away as she's glued on the wall.
Yes. Yes. The origin of the name Inland Empire, you and I talked a little bit off pod. So Inland Empire is an area east of Los Angeles County. It's a very nebulous region. There's not like a strict parameter of what is and what is not Inland Empire, although it's often considered to include Riverside and San Bernardino County.
It's so far inland, if you will, that you can almost see Long Beach from the far distances.
The idea of
away.
It's not Inland Empire is a region itself not surrounded by water.
Yeah.
It is just within walking distance of regions that are surrounded by water. It's a little inland empire, formerly called Orange Empire for those who...
I think Orange Empire would make a great
There was a
name.
lot of oranges. I read Wikipedia, so bear with me on the legitimacy of that. But going further, it is kind of a very striking title. We know that Mulholland Drive is also similarly a region in the area. Sunset Boulevard is also from that, obviously, as an influence on David Lynch. So there is this idea of a recurring Los Angeles street or area as the title of a David Lynch work, or again, coming all the way back down from Sunset Boulevard, which is where we got the name Gordon Cole, because that was from that. Anyway, the actual origin of how this name became tied to the film supposedly is that David Lynch and Laura Dern were having a conversation in which Dern mentioned her husband, who was the musician Ben Harper at the time. And they were talking about how Ben Harper was from the Inland Empire area. At which point, David Lynch confessed he stopped listening to whatever she was saying because he loved the sound of the words Inland Empire. And finally, he decided that that's going to be the name of the movie because, quote, "I like the word inland, and I like the word empire."
Should I be surprised at this
No.
point? Should I have like an ounce of like,
This is why
in me? Because I'm looking at this like that. No, that sounds about right, David Lynch.
So,
you do like the sounds of those words. Doesn't matter what we make next. Doesn't matter what it is. It could take place in the ocean.
I love that aspect of David Lynch where, you can read it two ways. You can, one, say he's lying, that the title actually does mean more, and he's being, facetious. Because there's some times where I do question if he's actually telling us the full truth. This is one of those cases where, no, I believe him. I think he just literally likes the sound of the words inland and empire. And you know what? I do too. And I find if I'm writing something or making something, sometimes I just go off of the feeling of the words.
That's good.
So
I'm happy for you.
It doesn't have to have like a deep reason. It could be more that this is just what feels right. And that doesn't mean it's less than. It just, those are the words that captured the feeling of the project he was making.
That's what happened. Like one day you were just like, we were talking and then you just stopped listening to me and I just said, wonderful and strange out in the distance. And our podcast became a thing.
I mean,
it was beautiful.
To be fair, you're joking aside, that is kind of what happened in a way, because when it came down to titling this podcast, I was the one pushing for that quote from Twin Peaks, which you hadn't even seen yet.
Yes.
Before you agreed to do this podcast.
Yes.
So I was really drawn to the word choice of wonderful and strange, and I wanted that to work with our title. So there wasn't like a deep analysis of why. I just wanted us to make a podcast that would be wonderful and strange about a show and a director that's wonderful and strange.
And look where we are now.
At a desk.
At a desk.
In a living room.
In a living room.
With poor lighting.
With poor lighting. All because you had to have this name.
Later, David Lynch, his brother, sent a scrapbook that Lynch had made when he was 5, sent Lynch a scrapbook, and on the first page of that scrapbook Lynch had made when he was 5 was an aerial photo of Spokane, Washington, with the words Inland Empire written beneath. So that was the cue that Lynch knew he was on the right track. He just had made at age 5 a photo of Spokane, Washington, but it said Inland Empire below that. It sounds kind of crazy. I'm going to go with it as true, but like, one of those, like, if you believe the universe and fate exist to call someone towards something, you can prophesize that
I'm
here.
pretty sure that's just like the sort of shrug people sort of give when it comes to David Lynch sometimes. Like, you know what? We're just gonna keep following down this rabbit hole. We can just keep going. We'll find out what's at the bottom.
I referenced Laura Dern's husband, Ben Harper, earlier as possibly being the origin point of the title of the film. Ben Harper is also rumored to be the piano player at the end during the credits. I say rumored because it's never been confirmed in a cast listing, from what I can tell. And because of how little he's on the screen and the quality of the footage and the dark lighting, no one's 100% sure it's Ben Harper. Even though Ben Harper is, like I said, a fairly famous, accomplished musician, we're not 100% sure it's Ben Harper.
Has no one checked with Ben Harper?
I don't think so. But I'm inclined to believe yes. It makes sense that it would be literally Laura Dern's husband would be on set for the credits, playing the piano. And also, again, that gets my mind working about how much music is an element in Lynch's films. Music carries the feeling for Lynch. When he's describing Laura Palmer, he's able to get Angelo Badalamenti to make music that sounds like the rustling in the winds that inspire him so much. So the idea of the person playing the piano being the person who grew up in Inland Empire, the person whose name's, like where he got the name for the movie, playing the music of the ending, it just feels poetic. It feels right.
Feels good.
Feels good.
No one that would.
David Lynch wrote, directed, and co-produced Inland Empire, as well as being involved in the cinematography, editing, score, and sound design. This is the first, I think, don't quote me, first David Lynch film we've talked about since Eraserhead? Maybe since Elephant Man, where Angelo Badalamenti was not involved. Angelo Badalamenti did not do the soundtrack for Inland Empire. Instead, Lynch did it himself and also worked alongside Polish composer Marek Zabrowski, who wrote music for the film and also acted as a music consultant. So when I refer to Inland Empire as being more of a David Lynch kind of thing, this is almost a one-man show in terms of so many of the aspects of the creation of this film and the production were helmed by Lynch. He had people to get things for him and to do things for him and consult with him. But Lynch had so much control over what this was in a way that he hasn't had since Eraserhead.
It must have felt nice, honestly.
It must have. It was so liberating, I have to imagine, even if chaotic at the same time.
Yes.
Lynch shot the film entirely in low-resolution digital video by himself using a handheld Sony DSR PD-150 camcorder rather than traditional film stock. Lynch would go on to say at this time that he would no longer use film to make motion pictures, adding that digital films gave one, quote, more room to dream and more options in post-production. Lynch financed much of the production with his own resources, and he also received help from ex-wife Mary Sweeney, who was a long-term artistic collaborator with him, as well as he received help from Studio Canal, the French production company he'd worked with previously for, like, Mulholland Drive.
Does he consider, just because, again, like, there's been, like, constant contesting on, like, what, like, the return is, does he consider Twin Peaks the return of film? Or
he
a show?
has said things to the extent of it being an 18-hour movie.
And
I don't know the exact situations and how serious he was.
Is it shot on the Sony camera?
It's not shot on this kind of thing. I think...
This kind of thing.
You know what? Let's put a pin in that, and when we get to the return... No, this is one I need to research.
Stab the camera with the pin.
I need to look into exactly what kind of cameras he used and what happened with it. I believe there was more digital shots happening with it, but higher grade, film quality type of stuff.
Yeah.
But I need to look more into what exactly he used for this before I can answer that question off the cuff. Lynch, again, edited the final results himself pretty much on Final Cut Pro in his home office over the course of 6 months. So again, he wrote the script as he went along. He shot this with these actors. He did almost everything involving the sound design, the cinematography, the production. He's the one holding the camera. And then at the end, he spent 6 months editing it pretty much himself, too.
Since this was too good to be on his website, how was it released then? judging from like the way that it was
he wanted to approach
edited.
it more independently, and then when he needed more assistance getting it out there, he went through Studio Canal
I see.
as a kind of semi-independent sort of venture.
Very well. So they were able to reformat and redistribute it into that format. Okay.
Which this is as good of a time as any to mention that Inland Empire has been notoriously difficult to get a hold of as far as Lynch's films, because it's been out of print for a hot minute. Lynch released it to the world, and then it kind of fizzled away, at least as far as North American releases. I got really lucky when I got my Inland Empire copy with everything else. It is harder to get a hold of now. However, if you're listening to this, not in the past,
not
but
in
the
past,
present or the future,
in the current present,
you may be living in a timeline where either the remaster has already come out or is about to come out soon. There's already been theatrical theater showings,
in the theaters.
In the theaters, one could say, theatrically, of Inland Empire's remaster that was recently done. So it hasn't fully been distributed as of time of recording, right now in late May of 2022. But there is a remaster in the works, and I have a lot of things to say about it at the end of this episode.
Neat.
But just know that it is going to be more commercially available soon.
Yay.
That's good.
Yay.
Right.
Maybe, I don't know.
Insert ominous whooshing noise.
Whoosh.
Insert nitpicky, contrarian, foreshadowing vibes. Yes. Going less on the technical level and more on the philosophical level for David Lynch's mindset. In 2003, Lynch had just returned from an intensive study with I hope I say this right, the Maharishi in the Netherlands. Due to his strong belief in the unified field, David Lynch decided not to try to force the ideas of Inland Empire to have the structure of a typical film script. Rather, very intentionally drawing off those viewpoints of the unified field, David Lynch would write and shoot the scenes periodically as the mood struck, given little thought about how they would relate to one another, and trusting that the bigger, larger picture would eventually reveal itself to him. Instead of, again, a completed screenplay, he would give each day the actors several pages of freshly written dialogue. In a 2005 interview, so again, right around the time Inland Empire released, Lynch described his feelings about the shooting process as such. Quote, "I have never worked on a project this way before. I don't know exactly how this thing will finally unfold. This film is very different because I don't have a script. I write the thing scene by scene, and much of it is shot, and I don't have a clue where it will end. It's a risk, but I have this feeling that because all things are unified, this idea over here in that room will somehow relate to that idea over there in the pink room."
This sounds like very much the case in which he's laying down the tracks as the train is just a-going.
What weirds me out is that Lynch more recently has not quite contradicted himself, but it feels like he's changing the tone of it. So with the upcoming remaster, there was this interview done by the AV Club, which if you're a David Lynch fan, I'd recommend you to go check it out. The AV Club interview with David Lynch from 2022, he talks about a few different anecdotes and thoughts about the remaster and about his other work. And there's some things he says in there that strike me as very different, very discordant with the mindset he had back in 2003, 2005, around the time of actually making Inland Empire.
Yes.
In this most recent interview, he corrected when he was asked about having no script. David Lynch said, "It wasn't that I had no script. I had a script all along. It just wasn't complete until it was complete, the way every other script is." In my opinion, as a podcaster and commentator, I think he is deliberately downplaying this.
I think he's just rewording things.
But basically the interviewer asked him, "Is it true that you didn't have a script with Inland Empire? Is that true?"
Yes.
And he said no.
Yes, he said
I
no.
didn't have a script. In fact, every script you make it as you go along. It's just like anything else. It's just less, it's just more off the cuff. And I don't agree with that, because when he was being interviewed at the time of Inland Empire, he straight up said, "I have never made a film like this before because this doesn't have a script." He literally said that wording, and now it feels like he's downplaying it changing his wording to make it seem like it was more planned out than it ever was.
Well, mind you, again, like, as far as, like, whenever it comes to about 17 years, like, usually perspectives can change in the span of about 2 decades and so on. Regardless, I think the same result was, well, the same. It's just that his opinion on what this script is was not necessarily script. He may have put things down for people to say, and in that sense, 17 years younger David Lynch might see that as no script, as this David Lynch sees it as actually all my scripts are like. Maybe he reached a new script-based enlightenment
I
from it.
believe him more in the early 2000s than I believe this current iteration. There's documentary footage when he made Inland Empire of him having last-minute phone calls, freaking out that he doesn't know what he's doing because he's making it up as he goes along. So that for him later to be like, oh, there was a script the whole time. It's just, a little different than... No. This was different. And I don't want David Lynch to downplay the fact that this was really weird. This is different. He was going off the cuff. He was improvising it. Actors would show up having no idea what's going on. They'd just be given random pages fresh from the night before. Like, that is not standard procedure for him.
It's not standard procedure from him, but maybe this is the transition to him seeing it as a potentially new standard for himself.
I don't know. And I don't know enough about the return back behind the scenes yet to know if the return was scripted similarly or not. I would wager it was not. I would wager he had a much stronger sense of a plan for the return than he did with Inland Empire, but I would need to do more research to determine exactly how much. At the Venice Film Festival, when the film was debuted, Laura Dern admitted she did not know what Inland Empire was about, or the role she was even playing, but hoped that seeing the film at the premiere would help her learn more.
Did it?
I don't know. I never found out a follow-up to that.
No one followed up on that? That seems like
not that I was seeing in my research.
Laura Dern disappeared from the scene right after the film.
Justin Theroux has also stated that he could not possibly tell us what the film is about, and he says, quote, "At this point, I don't know that David Lynch could. It's become a sort of pastime. Laura Dern and I sit around on set trying to figure out what's going on." In an NPR interview, Laura Dern recounted a conversation that she had with one of the movie's producers, Jeremy Alter. He had asked if Lynch was joking when he had requested a one-legged woman, a monkey, and a lumberjack by 3:15. Laura Dern reported that by 4 p.m., they were shooting with the requested individuals. So again, working with David Lynch, you could just be spontaneously asked for a one-legged woman, a monkey, and a lumberjack by 3:15, please, thank you. And no, I'm serious.
We've kind of seen a glimpse of that with one of his past assistant directors, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think
yeah.
so.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of context. I guess my question for you, Professor, is hearing all of that, is any of it surprising
No.
with the way the film feels?
No.
So this,
It's not surprising in general. Like, again, like, as far as David Lynch goes, no. Like, there's so few that'll surprise me from this man anymore.
but do you think that this film feels different than his previous in terms of the scripting and the writing and the way it feels? Because I personally do think this fits. Like, when I watch Inland Empire, this feels like something someone was making stream of consciousness.
As I was mentioning before, it's very much a collage. It's a various amounts of snippets placed together in a format that could be interpreted as different styles of a story and so on. It's not something that is going to be conventional by any means, but it still is something which I can see how these pieces came together. I can see how it's on the canvas.
So, Professor, I know you love genre. You love labeling things with films and genre.
Don't tell me.
And you love when I tell you what Wikipedia calls a film. So this might be. I'm gonna throw this out there. Optimistically, this may be the most you'll ever agree with Wikipedia labeling a David Lynch film.
Sure.
And now that I've said it, it's not gonna happen. But I'm gonna say this might be. Wikipedia describes Inland Empire as a 2006 experimental film.
You don't say Wikipedia.
It doesn't give you multiple words.
No multiple words.
It just
no
says it's an
explorations
experimental film.
Okay.
Well, it's the first like thing. It's not saying it does go into more detail.
Okay.
Because it's Wikipedia. It's a whole Wikipedia page.
Proceed.
Well, I'm not going to
then.
read the whole entire Wikipedia page to you.
Well, is that just the end of the genre then?
At the first line, yeah. Normally it'll say like a psychological romance drama or something.
Exactly.
No. Do you like that it just says experimental film? It's a one-word label. You've been complaining about word soup with Wikipedia this entire time.
If you gave it to me directly, no, it would not bother me. The fact that you had to build it up so much, Kalil.
Look, I'm just trying to set up
There's
something.
so much setup, though.
Okay, do you agree?
You built a ladder for me
Okay.
to find
Yeah.
a potato chip
Professor,
at the top.
would you agree that it is an experimental film?
Would I agree that I'll eat this potato chip since I got up here? Yeah. Yeah,
So
I'll
it is.
do
It's
that.
an experimental film.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Nice. It was released with the tagline, "A Woman in Trouble." Supposedly, this was because marketing didn't know what to do with advertising this movie, and that was about the best they could get out of David Lynch whenever they asked him what this movie's about, was the tagline, "A Woman in Trouble." What do you think of the tagline, "A Woman in Trouble" for Inland Empire?
Sure.
I think I might have spoiled this one on a previous pod, because we were talking about the taglines for other things, like Rabbits. We had found a tagline for Rabbits that was pretty apt. But would you say Inland Empire is a movie about a woman in trouble?
Yes,
Yes.
it is. It's still a tagline in which I imagine, okay, how many times do you just like walk around, if you will? You see then the poster board for Inland Empire. It's like, wow, that film is about a woman in trouble? That's exactly my type
Okay,
of genre.
my
Let's
point
go
is,
to the filmsies.
Let's say, for example, someone asked you, hey, this Inland Empire movie, what's it about? And if you answered them, oh, Inland Empire, it's an experimental film, and it's about a woman in trouble, would you be telling
You
the truth?
would not be wrong.
Like, would that be... I feel like that's actually a pretty apt way to do it, because anything more you give gets to be subjective immediately, because we do
Yep.
not know what's going on. Like, even if you are pretty confident in your interpretation, there's other interpretations that are equally as strong from almost every aspect of this movie. So, like, this was something we wanted to bring up at some point anyway. This is a weird movie in David Lynch's catalog in that I don't think it's very personal to any of the characters. Like, if you're watching Eraserhead and you say it's the story of Henry, it is. I think that's a valid way to view it. Blue Velvet, I think Jeffrey matters quite a bit. Mulholland Drive, you've got Naomi Watts' character, drives the whole entire movie. Mulholland drives the movie. My point is, a lot of his films, they're very much, their protagonist characters are a filter for us, or it's about them. I don't know if Inland Empire is about Nikki Grace or Sue. They're more of like an avatar for us to experience nightmares.
It's something in which I would say that it takes that sort of like concept with Blue Velvet, if you will, with a person traveling around, having things affect them, but in a more abstract format. It is something in which like this person is actively moving on their journey.
Yeah, it's not no agency like Jeffrey, like you
Yeah.
kind of complained.
I mean, like, the biggest aspect to this overall bit of chaos that I can think of as a direct example would be something like You and Nikki, if you will. You are...
Which is an experimental PC video game.
Yes. Where you are traveling through different overall areas, realms. You're kind of getting used to new surroundings before you may be shunted off to the next. if you
I
will.
think you could almost say that if someone's seen Twin Peaks, you could say that Inland Empire is the Red Room and in the last episode of season 2, but for 3 hours.
Red Room, hi! Don't you mention it? Oh, ho, ho, fun red
But
curtains.
it feels like
It
this movie was
does, and
made
it
in the Black
has
Lodge.
It has the things in it.
This movie was made in the Black Lodge.
This film is something in which you could argue is more Black Lodge stuff. That overall, tangibly throughout David Lynch's idea of a potential realm, that there is a potentially Black Lodge that is sound within the confines of his mind, and ergo leaks into all of his work.
Do you think Nikki Grace / Sue, Laura Dern's character, do you think she knows more of what she's doing and has more control over what's going on than Dale Cooper in the Red Room at the end of season 2?
No, in both these instances, I feel that the wheel has been taken out of the vehicle. You're in here for the ride at this point. There's no sense of agency at this point. You don't have any choices because you don't know where you are in the very next instance. 1 second, you're just trying to figure out what's going on, and the next second, when you have a point of panicking, you're thinking, God, this sounds like a script, when it actually is part of the script. Hey, there's the show, everybody.
This movie feels like a dream in a way that's somehow similar and also different from Mulholland Drive.
Yes.
Because Mulholland Drive, I could say that it is the story of this actor dreaming of a better way that things could have been. That's one interpretation you can give. And I could say that from the sense of, I think there's a clear part of a dream, and then there's a part after the dream, and I can identify dream logic and the way things flow, and I can go that sort of thing. Inland Empire, I'm in a nightmare. Like, Inland Empire, I am experiencing disorientation in a way that I don't experience in Mulholland Drive that I love. And I don't know where else you can get that. There are very few movies that can lead to this sort of feeling of helplessness for the viewer that Inland Empire can do. And not everyone it's going to click with. I could see someone watching Inland Empire and being bored because there's no characters to hardly care about. It takes a while before things start getting really weird. And I could see someone just rolling their eyes like about the rabbits and all the Polish stuff and finding nothing really to care about. And I would totally understand it. This is my favorite David Lynch film, but it also is the one that I could see someone hating the easiest.
Mm.
I totally understand. And then if you ask me, like, objectively which film's better, Mulholland Drive feels like a very well-made film. Inland Empire is this absolutely weird experimental project David Lynch made on a little camera that it felt thrown together the entire time. I love that about it.
Yes.
But I wouldn't call it traditionally well-made. I would call it like a masterpiece in evoking a specific feeling of a specific time and place from a specific person to put you into the subconscious of these nightmare worlds. But I would not call it a, like, traditionally, this is Best Picture. If Inland Empire won Best Picture of the Year, that would be very strange. That wouldn't feel right, you know? I love the movie, but it wouldn't make sense for this to win Best Picture. Maybe the best you could say is Laura Dern, perhaps, should get an award for her particular acting elements. Speaking of
Laura Dern.
Laura Dern received near universal acclaim for her performance, even people that didn't like the movie. People said Laura Dern at least did a good job. Many reviews described it as her best performance to date, her best performance in a movie. Lynch promoted Laura Dern's chances of an Academy Award for Best Actress nomination at the 2007 Academy Awards by sitting in the middle of Hollywood with a big billboard sign that said, "For your consideration, Laura Dern." And he had a real cow with him.
Why a cow?
Funny you should ask.
That's the first. That is the main question
Yes.
people should be going to.
There was a sign next to the cow that would say, "Without cheese, there wouldn't be Inland Empire." That explains it, right? If you're confused as well, there's this really chunky old YouTube video, probably shot in 2007, from a home camera and uploaded to YouTube, of someone asking David Lynch what this all meant. They walked up to him with the cow at the Hollywood area, and they're like, "What's this about?" And David Lynch just smiles, and he says, "Cheese is made from milk. You get it?" And that was all he really explained about it. This was his way of promoting Laura Dern because he wanted her to get the nomination for best. She did not get the nomination.
No.
She did a great job, but I also understand this is not a typical performance to evaluate at the Academy Awards.
Would you call her performance cheesy? Is that where
No,
the cheese
I don't
is
think it
coming from?
is. Okay, I actually do have an interpretation of this
Okay.
that makes sense in my brain.
Okay. Well, by all
So
means.
I think he is saying that. How should I put this? Milk and cheese have this relationship where cheese is made from milk. You can't have the cheese without the milk.
Yes.
Right? I think he's saying that's how Laura Dern is for Inland Empire. I think he is saying that, he says, without cheese, there wouldn't be Inland Empire. That if Inland Empire is the milk, the cultivation, the culturation, the maturation, perfecting of this idea is Laura Dern. She's the one that takes the milk and elevates it to the cheese. I don't think he's saying her performance is cheesy. I think he's saying that her performance has in it the source of Inland Empire.
Quite the compliment to say that you're rotting the milk in order for it to curdle.
Well, I mean, you need to for the good cheese.
You need to for the cheese.
I think that the sorrow and layered performance that she brings is the cheese. I actually don't think he's insane here. I actually think that, like, I think what he's saying makes sense.
I think you're currently trying, I think that
There's better.
I think that you believe that he makes sense. I believe he makes sense. But I also believe that at this point, it's just like, yeah, no, this is working out as you're slowly, like, becoming
milk
David
is to
Lynch
cheese.
yourself.
Milk is to cheese as Laura Dern is to Inland Empire. Makes sense. Well, actually, be more Inland Empire is to Laura Dern.
There you go.
But, so you understand. You wouldn't know how to correct me if you didn't understand.
There's nothing to correct here. I'm just going with whatever David Lynch and yourself are putting down so that the train can keep moving forward, because at this point, I don't know what to say.
David Lynch said that the strategy of advertising with the cow was necessary because he couldn't buy ads in the trades.
The cow was necessary. There's no other path.
Well, he just said this strategy, which I guess involves a cow, so I don't know how loosely he meant that.
But okay, who's cleaning up after the cow?
I don't know.
Like, does David Lynch
Who cleaned after Laura Dern? Or is Laura Dern the cow? Is David Lynch the cow?
You see where you're
David
already
Lynch
lost
is the cow.
there?
David Lynch is the cow. The milk is Inland Empire. Laura Dern's the cheese.
Now that we
Makes
got ourselves reoriented.
And then we eat the cheese.
But what happens to the poop?
I don't know. The poop is... What is the poop? Well, the cow poops. So David Lynch is the cow. We're the poop. We're the droppings left over by David Lynch.
I'm just wondering,
stewing, analyzing.
Street, what he's doing to dispose of waste.
I'm thinking
Because
more
it's the
metaphorical
freaking
right
cow.
now. Yeah, but we're the waste. We're the cow.
There's a farm animal on a road where, let me tell you right now, that cow probably wasn't comfy.
So, as far as awards, Inland Empire was kind of a weird thing. It was again, Laura Dern was not nominated for the Academy Award, but she did get nominated for Best Actress at the National Society of Film Critics Awards, which is where Inland Empire that same year did win the award for Best Experimental Film. Inland Empire has been listed among Sight and Sound's 30 best films of the 2000s, as well as The Guardian's 10 most underrated movies of the decade. On review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 72%, based on 109 reviews. Be honest with you, I'm surprised it's that high of an approval rating. 72% of critics said, I like this movie, out of the 109, with an average score of 7.2 out of 10. The website's critical consensus reads, the typical David Lynch fare. Fans of the director will find Inland Empire seductive and deep. All others will consider it heady surrealism, impenetrable, and pointless. On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 73 out of 100, based on 24 critics indicating generally favorable reviews. Again, I'm surprised it is that high, and I love this movie. Hey, we've talked for a while now. Do you want to actually talk about the movie and like the story and like the characters and like the plot and like everything else? Huh? How's that sound?
An hour in?
Well, with editing, it might be 58 minutes in.
Might be.
Look, I know this is a lot of context. Anyone who is seeking out this episode either has been with us for like 54, 55 episodes.
Yep.
You know, well over 100 hours.
Yep.
Or there's someone who probably likes Inland Empire enough that they might find the things interesting that I found really interesting. Because I found all of that research very interesting.
I just hope for the third parties who are trying to follow along with all this separate media.
The third party is using us to fall asleep right now, and I think we helped them. I think we helped
well,
them.
and the fourth party I'm concerned on is the fact that, like, imagine, like, with our podcast, okay?
Yeah.
Like, all the little pieces in which someone might be like, oh, I'll go to this streaming service here, or I'll try to pick up this over here.
Yeah.
Just, like, trying to constantly catch up, and now we have the brick wall of, it's very hard to get hold of Inland Empire. And that wall
well,
is
it
now
is going
there.
to be much more available with the remaster.
It is.
Again, ominous whooshing.
Ominous whoosh.
I have things to say.
Mm.
So, I think the best place to start as far as analyzing Inland Empire, again, we've already prefaced at the precipice that there is no one interpretation we think is 100% correct. We're going to try to piece together things, but what it all means and why it all matters is going to be completely subjective.
It's like that one show with that one comedian where the points just don't matter. But we just improv
King
our
of the
way.
Hill. King of the Hill.
And we improv our way.
King of Queens.
Close. It's
King of Comedy.
like kind of like take the King of Queens protagonist and King of the Hills protagonist and fuse them into one person, and you kind of have like
The Office.
Drew Carey.
Drew Carey.
Like Drew
Price
Carey.
is Right.
Before that,
The Drew Carey Show.
after that, whose line is it anyway? That's it. We made it.
Hooray us. Hooray us.
Hooray us?
Hooray us. Anyway, so where I think the best place to start is with the script. The script within the script of On High and Blue Tomorrows. So while a lot of this film falls apart, before things start getting real crazy, we have this idea that there is an actress named Nikki, right, who gets this opportunity to be part of a film called On High and Blue Tomorrows. As far as this film goes, like I said before, as I was saying before, I don't think this movie really matters much as far as Nikki herself. We don't actually really know a lot about Nikki herself in the 3 hours we're here. The best we could probably say is that the actress Nikki Grace lives in a mansion with her very powerful husband. She has had enough success with films to not be as desperate as the character in Mulholland Drive.
I think we could at least dissect the words of it a little bit here.
We could dissect the words a little bit. The problem is, if Nikki Grace is even real or not is highly contestable.
It is contestable, but everything else is contestable
Yes.
in this film. So, On High of Blue Tomorrows, we already are going to be dealing with weird timelines.
Oh, I'm just saying Nikki herself. I don't think
okay.
she matters as much.
Okay.
Whereas, the main character in Mulholland Drive, Naomi Watts' character, I would argue almost everything stems from her. Whereas in this movie, it's I think Nikki Grace kind of just... If she's real, she kind of just is an actress who has a powerful husband and got this film script. I'm inclined to believe that this is actually a good conversation point. I'm inclined to believe that everything that happened to Nikki Grace, if she is a real independent person, is not her fault. I'm inclined to believe this script is almost cursed and magical and nightmarish, and she got pulled in. I don't know if it's because she was already like this. There's the implications here of an affair, that she cheats on her real-life husband with the actor who plays the character in the movie. I don't get the sense that she was adulterous or seeing other people before that. I get the sense that the film molded her into the character. And that's not really Nikki's particular situation. It's any actress this could have happened to. Mm-hmm. So my question for you is, do you think that if Nikki is in fact real, do you think it matters that it was her versus any other actress who could have got this role?
Nope.
I think it would have happened to anyone.
I think at the very least, it's really dependent on if you take a real person, but then how much mythical nature you bring in. Because if she is a real person, and what happens inside of this? Well, maybe it's a Black Lodge situation, in which this is her personal punishment. Because
there are interpretations where she's not even real, that Nikki is the imagined self of another character. If we do take Nikki to even be real, I think, again, the film just kind of took over her anyway.
Not to mention, say, for example, how the film may have taken over her, how the film sort of, correlates somewhat to her own life, if you will, with her overall husband. It somewhat matters, but less for, her specifically, and more so, the lifestyle
it's the film
that she
chose
leads.
her.
The film chose her.
Which is... curious.
It was a remake after so long, they decided to pick it up again, so maybe it was after the fated Nikki was birthed, the chosen one for us to throw this through again.
Returning to what you were saying, On High and Blue Tomorrows, the idea of the tomorrow being blue. Typically when someone says they're feeling blue, it's a sadness, typically. But with David Lynch, he uses the colors blue and red a lot, and I don't think we've ever come to a concrete term of if blue ever means something specific. I've sometimes thought that red and blue mean different forms of truths or ideas. Maybe the sense that red is a more dangerous sort of idea, and blue is typically more of an illuminating, truthful idea, a good one. But that's been very dependent on the film and the situation. So if we take the David Lynch idea, if blue is a color of revelation or truth or realization, it could be that. It could be the sadness blue as well. It could just be blue, the color. On high, you have the idea of obviously someone's feeling a high, but also if it's blue, there's the sky.
It's honestly, on high, I think could easily be relative to being dreamlike, if you will. You are on
in the
high.
Clouds.
You feel in the clouds. You feel something of being free.
So there's almost, if I want to read into the title, I think a little bit too much maybe, it's almost a contradictory title because blue, tomorrows, it's a sad tomorrow. But you're high, you're almost having the sense of elevation or excitement, and the totality of the title put together, someone who's up in the clouds, high up there, but looking down on a dark tomorrow potentially.
The fake title may have had more thought into it than the real title.
In the universe of Nikki, the movie is being directed by Kingsley Stewart. Nikki Grace is going to be playing Susan Blue. That's also where the name can come from as well. Her name is literally Blue. Then you have Devin Burke, who is playing Billy's side. Notably, Devin Burke being played by Justin Theroux, who previously played the director character in Mulholland Drive, now making a recurrence.
Very notable. I gotta say, though, the director character in this film specifically, I'm really enjoying his overall performance.
Oh, he's a good actor.
I think he does an excellent means of bringing so much energy to the role, especially in contradiction to everything that we see along the way.
Yeah, no, the actor's Jeremy Irons. I just made sure I got the name right by Googling, but Jeremy Irons, and no, he's pretty good. I remember liking him in Watchmen, the HBO series. He's very good in that.
Well, I liked him as Scar from The Lion King. That little bastard. So good.
You're referring to the remake, I'm assuming? No, original?
1994. He played Scar.
He was Scar? Oh, now that you're saying it, I can imagine.
Yep, there you go.
You know what? Good for Jeremy Irons. He's probably underrated.
He's got a lot of charisma inside of his vocal cords.
Anyway, weird thing, On High and Blue Tomorrow's in-universe is being shot in April 2005, around the same time that in-universe in our world, Inland Empire would have been being made. So there's already that parallel that David Lynch is making Inland Empire at the same time that On High and Blue Tomorrow's is being made. And it's a remake, we find out, very curiously. The film involves an affair between Sue and Billy, both of whom are married. Billy has 2 children. Over the course of the movie, as you've indicated, it blurs the lines between the movie affair and the real affair that starts to occur between the actors. Based on the accents, the film seems to take place somewhere in like the American South, potentially, because we do hear Nikki take on that sort of accent, and we'll also hear Devin take on the Billy accent. However, once Nikki becomes trapped in the world of the film, Billy lives in Los Angeles. If we're going by the logic of the movie,
yes,
he's still being Billy with his accent, but he's in Los Angeles, and Sue lives nearby, possibly in Inland Empire.
Ha.
So it gets to be, again, more confusing about the setting even as we get further in. Nikki initially says that the movie does not involve murder, which would imply that the original script draft that she was given when she auditioned and was waiting to get the role, it did not list murder being involved in the story at all. She did acknowledge that the movie has something to do with a marriage, in a sense. Then as it progresses, though, we see in Inland Empire, very late into the storyline, the character of Sue being stabbed to death, dying on Hollywood, literally like bleeding on Hollywood stars, and then the camera pulls out, implying that it was part of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So, was Inland Empire, sorry, it's not Inland Empire. Sorry, was On High and Blue Tomorrow's going to be a film about murder originally? Did Nikki just not know? Did it become a story about murder later? Or is the stuff we see later where it's being shot not real in the sense that the stuff with Nikki earlier was real? I think that's all up to your interpretation.
I think that's up to anyone's interpretation.
There's definitely a contradiction here that requires some sort of resolution if you want to make sense of it. And again, my first viewing of Inland Empire, why I fell in love with it, was not logical. I love the way this feels. I would shut my brain off and just experience things. So I don't think you need to understand Inland Empire to enjoy it. For those of you who like to talk about it anyway, though, we're still going to.
I mean, I
still like those conversations.
I mean, there's also the statement, say, for example, if there was a change in the overall script and then there were some reshoots that focused on it. And then we could say, going into Grace Zabrisky's character later on in this podcast, that this was just a vision of what was to come.
Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed that moment when after she's like dying or whatever on the Hollywood, and it pulls away to show the cameras there. I've always found that moment to be really, really cool.
It is cool.
Because it's been so long since we've been in the world of the shooting of the film that it's easy to have forgotten that it already was being filmed at one point.
I'm pretty sure that was like about 2/3 in the film since we've seen like a camera. So
it
that's
calls
like a
into
whole
question.
hour.
It calls into question how much, if anything, we'd been watching had been shot as well. Mm-hmm. You know, when she's upstairs doing the accent, talking to Mr. K, is that part of On High and Blue Tomorrow's? Is it not? What's going on? That just pervades the entire film, and little moments like the camera pull away with the crew at the death scene really make the rest of the film even more questionable. Mm-hmm. Love it. Speaking of questionable things, before shooting the film, Nikki, or maybe it's during early forms of shooting the film, Nikki and Devin show up on the Marilyn Levins talk show. where things get even more meta than they already were. So you've already got the idea that Laura Dern, a recurring David Lynch actor, is in this movie, playing alongside Justin Theroux, who had been in Mulholland Drive as a director, now playing an actor. You had Grace Zabriskie, who previously had been a seer and visionary of sorts within Twin Peaks, has now returned again to be in this movie as another neighbor character with a vision, and also considering Wild at Heart, her character in that as well. Now you have the element of another Wild at Heart aspect, in that we get the return of the actor who had been playing Laura Dern's mother in Wild at Heart, who literally is Laura Dern's mother. She returns now as Marilyn Levins, the talk show host. The first words out of her mouth on the talk show literally reference the idea of mothers and children. She says something along the lines of like, mothers, keep your children at closer. I can't remember the way she worded exactly, but she literally references motherhood and childrenhood at the beginning opening of her talk show, which reminds viewers potentially of that similarity.
It's almost as if like there's instances in this film that feel like a step back that sort of like looks at you from the camera and is like, hey, since you're paying attention at home.
See, but a lot of times fourth wall breaks in movies are used for comedy or being used like for very self-aware sort of this feels,
continues to be the dream.
No, that's what I kind of think is interesting about the way that Lynch is potentially doing fourth wall breaks. He is making this film knowing fully well who he's casting and in what roles and what similarities and what parallels, but it never feels like a cheap, like wink toward the camera sort of thing. It's being used to further unhinge the movie. It's being made to further make it feel less real. This feels like a fictional David Lynch film. Right? Like this feels like you let's say you're a huge David Lynch fan and you went to sleep and had a nightmare and in your mind you made up a new fake David Lynch film. That's Inland Empire.
Yeah.
You took Laura Dern from here, it's just something weird about that. And then I almost felt that when the talk show host was talking, there was a point where she kind of did something and there was a musical flourish that sounded a lot like Wizard of Oz to me. It was sort of like a magical flourish sound effect. So you've got that element in there that may be intentional, maybe not. I got Wizard of Oz vibes from that sound effect.
Why would you ever get Wizard of Oz from David Lynch's films?
Marilyn Levins, whatever her name is, mentions this idea that there's going to be a shocking revelation about Devon. She asks Nikki if she can be true to her hubby with a wolf in the den. So before there's any indications at all of Nikki being romantically interested in this actor, she says she's keeping things professional. This talk show host brings it to that point of suspicion about a potential affair that could happen.
Yeah.
Devon tells Marilyn that if she's looking for shock value, she should look in a mirror. And I'm going to go on a limb and say that this, again, could be a form of fourth wall break and reference, because if I think of this actor in a David Lynch film in a mirror, I think of Wild at Heart, her smearing that lipstick all over herself. If you want shock value, look at yourself in a mirror. That could be a reference to Wild at Heart. It doesn't have to be. It makes sense on its own if it's not. But it's, again, the circumstances behind it and the very specific wording of it that make me think it's a callback.
Yeah. No, I think that, again, this is very intentional from his own end, or at the very least, something's coming back for surface level whenever it comes to, like, dealing with these overall well, dealing sounds like a tense word. Having these individuals return to him and bring back their overall strengths, and he then repurposes those strengths in a new narrative, if you will. He's recycling.
But this time, David Lynch is doing it way more transparently.
Very much so.
Which is interesting to see the mind at work. We mentioned before that this movie is, in fact, a remake, not Inland Empire, of course. That's a totally original film. But the film On High and Blue Tomorrows is a remake of this Polish film with a German title. And the German title is Vierseben, which translates to 4-7. Notably not 47, but 4-7, which is a Polish folktale said to be cursed.
Remember the number 4-7?
Yes. A film adaptation of the story had been attempted, but the filmmakers discovered something inside the story. That's the way the film words it. That the filmmakers had discovered something inside the story, and both leads were murdered before the film could be finished. On High and Blue Tomorrows, then, is a remake of an unfinished film adaptation of the folk tale Vierseben. The tale, presumably, from what we can just piece together, depending on what you think is, again, the story within the story, Vierseben presumably involves an affair between two married people, just like on High and Blue Tomorrow does. And the curse and tales seemingly relate to this character we are going to call the Phantom. That's what they're called in the credits. There is one reference to it as, I think they're called that in the credits, but there's at least like a specific reference where they call the character the Phantom in the movie.
Yeah.
And the Phantom is shown to be abusing his wife. She then cheats on him with a married man. The wife of the married man finds out about the affair, and there's this death that follows up. The Phantom uses his powers to force the story to recur, as a lot of interpretations would say, while innocent people are drawn into the mix through the remake process. Possible that the story is older than the Phantom himself, that he simply commandeered the existing curse and assumed the mantle from someone else, or maybe not. It's unclear. Point is, we see the Phantom, the relationship and the abuse, taking place in almost like a sepia-colored early 1900s Poland. And if the folk tale is older than that, as a lot of folk tales tend to be quite old, it is unclear if the Phantom is the same Phantom all the time or if there's previous versions of the story.
Well, as long as some folks make some tales, it's a folk tale, isn't it?
It's unclear. Would you believe it? Note that the rabbit's home is accessible through a door that is labeled 47.
There it is. That's the 47.
So, depending on how much you want to read into it, the rabbits are shown to be inside of room 47, aka 47. And this is, again, strange that it's called 47 Vierseben and not 47, which would be Sieben und Verseg. I don't know why. It's confusing. And why is it not in Polish? Why is it in German? Is it? I think maybe the remake was in German? I don't know. Who knows? Grace Zabriskie plays the first visitor who comes to Nikki's house, and we get pretty much early on the indications that things are going to get weird through this character, through her wandering into this house. She seems like lost almost through reality as she's walking around. She introduces herself as a new neighbor who lives just down the street in a brick house tucked back in the small woods, noting that it is hard to see it from the road. I guess that's good if you're trying to be safe from the big bad wolf, right?
Oh, absolutely. I just thought to myself when I was hearing that, I was like, oh yeah, it's just down the road. The brick house. Well, thankfully there's only one of those in which the house is of brick and stone. I think it's like a fun sense of vagueness, if you will, that just traveling down the road and hopefully finding that one house in which she may exist or she may not exist. It seems deliberately vague in a way that I thoroughly enjoy.
And the visitor implies that she knows a lot of what's going on beyond even what Nikki knows. Because somehow this visitor knows that Nikki is up for a new role and in fact has that role. Although Nikki to this point has not heard it confirmed. Nikki asks, well, that's a typo in my notes. The visitor asks if the film is about marriage and suggests that Nikki's husband is involved. And Nikki's like, no, what are you talking about? And the visitor then suddenly shares this old tale. A little boy went out to play. When he opened his door, he saw the world. As he passed through the doorway, he caused a reflection. Evil was born. Evil was born and followed the boy. And before we analyze that one, she does give a variation on the tale in which a little girl went out to play.
I'm trying to find the blue velvet case so I can wave it at your face and go reflection. Not blue velvet, sorry. Mulholland Drive and be like reflections.
A little girl went out to play, lost in the marketplace as if half born. Then, not through the marketplace, you see that, don't you? But through the alley behind the marketplace. This is the way to the palace. But it isn't something you remember. So, between these two different stories, I find it easier to talk about the one involving the little girl.
Yeah,
I get more lost about the boy.
In the movie.
Because the little girl one we can very clearly see in the sense that Nikki Grace / Sue goes behind a marketplace, right? Very literally.
Behind a marketplace, a place in which there are many various shops because it is literally in
and she goes to the Axon N door through that area, right?
Yes.
And enters the world, so to speak, that we then see her in the set and things start going weird and dissolving. So it's not that hard to go to this idea. Now, what the palace means is open to interpretation. When she enters the Axon N door, I don't see her necessarily go to a palace, but she does go to some other strange kind of world, potentially. And again, it's something you don't remember. It's curious because it implies that she's done it before. Or, again, as the visitor acknowledges they sometimes get time mixed up. You forget whether it's today, tomorrow, a week from now. You just kind of, you forget what time is.
Hakuna Matata.
So is it that she's done this before in a past life? Or is it that she's going to do it soon again? Who is to say? Either way, it's not something that Nikki would remember, right?
Doesn't seem like memory's working out so well throughout the film, so we're going to go with the answer being yes.
The original tale with the little boy, I'm a little more stuck. He opened his door, he saw the world. As he passed through the doorway, he caused a reflection. Evil was born, and followed the boy. What do you take that to mean?
It's hard to say. Again, it could be one thing in which it's like an origin of like a first evil or an idea of sin in which an idea of ambition is once followed, but with also its overall darker side. Insert your little apples and Garden of Eden's right here. It could be a sense that it's kind of like laying the groundworks for your Red Lodge or your overall Black Lodge, Red Room, Black Lodge situations where there are darker entities that are reflections of other people based off of what they're willing to overall encounter based on like them venturing outside of the safety of their home, the safety of the cage, etc., etc. It could be very much a situation where like it probably could be one of these characters that we see with a generally darker nature, like the abusive husband, if you will, that once before something had occurred, had once had a better side that invited her into the home, if you will. But after that, like she also aid witness to the reflection that was left behind that was much more of a darker nature. You could also say that it could be about 20 different things in this film.
I think it's interesting that this wording could be used to describe Leland in Twin Peaks pretty well, except for the idea that evil was born when he opened the door. Because if we go by most Twin Peaks material at this point, it seems that Bob existed before Leland.
Bob did exist before Leland, but it depends on what you interpret for Bob. Like, does Bob only exist thanks to the opening of the door where he's basically then created?
I mean, it's the vampire myth. If you have to let them in, you have to be able to open that door. So I think there's the idea with Leland that the evil was let in, but it already existed before. But there's a lot of open to interpretation ideas when it comes to Leland. Whatever was going on with Pearl Lakes. I was talking to you off pod, but I was looking through our old podcasts and taking notes. And I need to go back at some point, maybe the episode. But when they do research in like early season 2 of Twin Peaks into the Palmer family's neighbors in Pearl Lakes, he claimed there was a Robertson, right? And that Robertson was the one who'd flick the matches and all that sort of stuff. But then when they did the research, they didn't find a Robertson. They found a Kali spell. And when we first went through it, we didn't really think much of that name. But when I went back, Kali? Like the Kali worshippers? Spell as in magician spell? So I don't know if that's even connected or interpreted or whatever to do with that.
The magical individuals known as the Kali casting spells and so on might be potentially put towards Dugpa's Bob something.
But that was so early that they wouldn't have had that established yet. So it's a question of, is it coincidence? Was it on purpose? Was it set up?
And I don't even trust looking for the spelling on that, because at the end of the day, I don't really trust the spelling of the subtitles, because we've had instances in the past with like a Lou Hamster, if you will. So that just, again, continues to complicate things as far as what we want to do to try to dissect it and get an answer.
Well, going back to the story itself, if I do take the boy to be someone in the movie, the way that I'm taking the girl to be Nikki / an iteration of Nikki, there's three possibilities I have. I don't even know which one I would believe most strongly.
It was me, wasn't it?
One would be the Phantom. He's the most evil-seeming character. He's the most shadowy-seeming character in a lot of interpretations.
And just by the name alone.
By the name alone, the shadow. So he could either be the one who opened the door, or he could be the shadow itself. But either way, that could explain him. Another interpretation I could have is that it could be the first male who had the affair that caused infidelity in their relationships that threatened both their families.
Yeah.
You could argue that the door was being opened was the door to that affair. I also think there's an argument for Jack Rabbit, in the sense that Jack Rabbit is the one shown literally opening doors into other worlds. We see him open the door and take on different potential characters, or if not become them, foreshadow them. And we do enter 47 later. it appears to be a barrier. So I guess if I had to pick one, I would actually go with Jack Rabbit more than the Phantom, only for the literal idea of opening doors being continuously associated with Jack Rabbit in the rabbit's room, but then also outside the rabbit's room.
Okay.
He is one who, because we get that part where Jack Rabbit opens the door, and then we get this character in there who's talking to the Phantom and says, you're looking for a way in, you're looking for an opening. That sounds like a door. So is the one opening the door the Phantom, or is it the one that literally took the place of the rabbit in the chair and it are applied to be together?
Or
so it could be either.
It could be, like, is the man in the green suit potentially the reflection?
Yeah.
Is there going to be a point in which, like, since he was so close to door 47 in the first place, is it the Phantom who is the reflection of Jackrabbit? Like,
This movie, man.
this movie.
The Visitor, again, tells these stories and insists that there is a murder involved, at which point, she starts being very aggressive with her language choice. And Nikki is not having it. She says, this is bothering me. You need to go. And the Visitor starts talking about, if it was today, 2 days from now, or yesterday, I wouldn't know the difference. She says, I suppose if it was 9:45, I'd think it was after midnight. For instance, if today was tomorrow, you wouldn't even remember that you owed on an unpaid bill. Actions do have consequences, and yet there is the magic. If it was tomorrow, you would be sitting over there. And then does the pointing, at which point we get the camera view of Nikki looking to the place where it's being pointed, and bam, through movie magic, we have suddenly a potential time skip of Nikki in the chair finding out the phone call that she got the role. I love that moment where she gets the role, the ominous music, and the sort of effect happening where you can't tell if she's, what emotion she has with her reaction, because Nikki has the phone to her face and looks like she's like crying, screaming, but also laughing at the same time. Turns out it's joy.
That's what joy looks like. Huh?
That's what joy looks like. And later we get a character who's often considered Visitor 2, who approaches Nikki about an unpaid bill. Don't really see much of that character, but there is a second visitor that shows up in the other household with the awful furniture that you hate.
It's so bad.
It's so bad.
There's no way to sit at it comfortably at any of these spots. You're either like elbows in on a tiny chair, or you are inside of a small couch spot with zero back support, unless you were to lay back on the spine of the couch. And believe it or not, the spine is the least comfortable part of the couch.
Just like people. Spines are the least comfortable part about sitting on people as well. Anyway, so continuing, I personally, when it comes to the 9:45 and midnight stuff, because it recurs throughout the film, there's a lot of talk about 9:45 and midnight. You could go through and try to track down timelines and figure out exactly what time things are happening. I don't think that's the intention, and I don't think it's what makes sense in my brain for the movie. But if you enjoy that, knock yourself out. Feel free. I personally read it as 9:45 and midnight and the times in between are more the ambiguity of time, and they're sort of recurring tethering points, with a lot of times the events of the movie taking place in those dark hours between 9:45 and midnight. Midnight also being the sense of change, of transition. If it happens after midnight, it's the next day, it's the next tomorrow. So I take it more to be symbolic in a loose way about time and not knowing when things happen than I do it being that 9:45 and midnight really matters specifically.
I think that for the most part, whenever it's 9:45 or midnight, I'm thinking, again, on the sense of in the meta sense, in which when it comes to scheduling and so on, whenever it comes to these characters, the character can exist at midnight, but as far as scheduling goes, people are probably having to get up really early in the morning. You're probably taping that thing about 9:45.
AM, you're thinking?
PM.
Oh, you're thinking PM, okay.
Yeah, because it'd be dark in both times, 9:45
So 9:45 PM for the actors is midnight for the character.
Exactly.
Okay, that's an interesting way to fold it into your theory. I think that works. We do get a potential reference to this visitor through the director Kingsley. Some people have latched onto this when Kingsley references having a 99-year-old niece, that's the wording, who has been fascinated by Smithy since the day the film went into production. She keeps asking who is playing Smithy in her, quote, ancient foreign voice. Given the visitor's knowledge that Pio Trek would be involved in the film, it is possible that Kingsley is talking about the visitor who has a thick Polish accent. I'm inclined to say, yeah. 99-year-old niece implies a contradiction, a sort of weird element here.
Not necessarily a contradiction.
Not necessarily a contradiction, but
it just really depends.
very
on,
unlikely.
But still a chance.
I'm thinking of
There's
how
still a
old, do you
shot.
think Kingsley is old enough to have a 99-year-old niece?
Depends on how ambitious their overall family was on
Excuse me?
spawning.
Okay, ambitious on spawning. You said it, not me. But the idea of is it, the timeline, usually the word niece implies younger, but we're talking 99. That fits potentially the idea of the ancient foreign voice asking all these different roles. Considering we never see this character, I think it's likely that, this could be talking about the Polish, the visitor.
Very likely.
We also see her first on the Lost Girls TV on fast forward mode, walking to Nikki's house. And then toward the end of the film, we get footage of the visitor replaying at the very end, and she seems to be smiling after Nikki has broken the curse of the Phantom. There's a sense of good. This is good. Now, is it good, or is the visitor's wishes bad, and this is a bad good? Who knows?
Who knows? All I can say is that either everything went into a loop or everything's better. It's hard to say.
One figure kind of at the central of a lot of interpretations for Inland Empire is the Lost Girl. We don't get necessarily a name for her, but we see her throughout the film crying on the hotel bed. So
Yes.
she is kind of our viewpoint in. She's the one watching the TV as things start. We get flashes of her now and then throughout the movie, and then especially at the end. So when I say Lost Girl, that's who I'm talking about. So chronologically speaking, the earliest we get is Poland, because the Lost Girl was married to the man who was, or would become, or always has been, the Phantom. So the Phantom and the Lost Girl were married, presumably, if we're taking the actors to be the case.
Presumably.
The Phantom was physically abusive to the Lost Girl. We saw physical aggression from him. She started having an affair with a married man around that same time, presumably. Presumably is the key word of all this discussion. She runs into her husband, the Phantom, on the street. He says he's not used to seeing her out on the street and not at home. Tells her that there'd been a murder. He thought she knew the person who died. Both were aware of the unspoken truth that this person who had died and been murdered was her lover, the person that she had been seeking in the affair that is not her husband. Yes. In a Lynch documentary, David Lynch can be seen directing this scene, and he tells the actors to play it as if they've entered into a dream, like they've seen it before. Don't treat it like a casual conversation. Instead, be very adult, proper, and solid, was the way that he directed them to do this part. If you want to use that in your interpretation, you
Adult,
certainly
proper,
may.
solid. Got it. I shall now be the adult in this conversation. Proper and solid.
I got more things to add about this later when we get into other people's interpretations. But at face value, what do you make of the Polish part of the Lost Girls storyline? What do you think of the Lost Girls character in Poland?
The lost characters in Poland? I think that
With the Phantom as her husband, with the affair, the death of the peoples. What do you make of this?
I think it's one of those little background storylines that makes things a bit more interesting in the respects of trying to weave in this character that could be living vicariously through the person who's on the television, who ends up
Which would be
trying to grow
Nikki.
by the end. Yes.
Which is weird then because she's watching Nikki, not watching Nikki act. She's not
Exactly.
watching one of Nikki's movies as an actor. She's watching Nikki.
Potentially.
Unless, unless Her in the Mansion is a movie and within a movie, Inception.
But yes, I think that it adds a nice little layer on top of it all, just because, for my overall theories, being that outside viewer affecting her overall livelihood on the outside, it could be something as just another fun reflection, if you will, if we are to say that the story is being told another way, using the boy metaphor, but inside the female asset of herself, as well as the character inside of the overall film itself. There's also the act of what she had done, this overall guilty act. You could almost say that she's looking...
Through the affair.
Yep, through the affair. That a lot of this is just more so her working through her own personal traumas until eventually, by the end, it seems that she's come to a better resolution with herself. With one that is not with the person who is stabbed by a screwdriver.
Perhaps.
So
the Lost Girl, we see her again crying on the bed in the hotel room. She is naked except for holding a blanket over her. She's watching a static TV screen with the static electricity, but then through the electric waves, the image comes through of Nikki and the visitor. So she does seem to view things through that. And she also views rabbits through this TV screen as well. Some theorizing is that she uses Axon N, the recording, as a portal of sorts to speak to Sue, because there are moments where it appears that she is speaking to Sue to pass on information to her, such as telling her she has to wear the watch and push the cigarette through the silk and turn right and fold the silk and view through the hole to enter this other world. So it's possible she is the Lost Girl communicating through Axon N to Nikki/Sue. Maybe. This advice leads the character then, Nikki/Sue, to learn about the Lost Girl's past and save her, maybe, through shooting the Phantom. Yes. The Lost Girl watches the footage of her lover waiting for her the night that she was beaten by her husband. She watches later as his corpse is lying in a pool of blood, so she seems to be able to see on the TV not just stuff with Nikki, not just stuff with the Jackrabbit, but also stuff from her own past in Poland. Sue also sees the Lost Girl in a ketchup stain on Smithy's shirt, in the sense that it goes into the ketchup stain and then shows us footage of the Lost Girl, and they're kind of overlapping each other. And the Lost Girl's praying in Polish over candles in a black veil, and her Polish translated prayer is "Cast out this wicked dream that has seized my heart," which is a reference to Sunset Boulevard. She's praying in Polish, a quote from Sunset Boulevard about casting out a wicked dream.
That seems a little bit strange, don't you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's if you were to ask me one thing to point to for what's going on, I think that's one of the top contenders I would choose, is just the fact that David Lynch is doing a direct reference to this movie that is set in Hollywood, that has been so influential to Mulholland Drive. This movie is a remake of something, and that it is the prayer about casting out a bad dream from the Lost Girl. This is where I would point to as this is kind of clear. In a sea of confusion, this seems a little clear.
In a sea of confusion.
This is the
sometimes
seal.
You see something pop up, like a whale, a shark, or a seal.
A seal. Kiss from a rose.
Does it have your seal
a blue
approval?
Rose. It has my seal. Then there's the seance. The three Polish men, who some have interpreted to be the incarnations of all of the rabbits, the three rabbits. I'm not sure. I think Jack Rabbit is definitely there. I'm not as sure the other two have left the room. Not as convinced, because they are men. I mean, maybe they just gender transformed. It's possible.
Maybe.
They are magical rabbit people, so who am I to say what they can and can't do? But I don't know if, in fact, I'm supposed to interpret all three Polish men to be the rabbits. I'm not sure. Anyway, they summon the Lost Girl through the seance. She then sits at the table with her head in her hands. Smithy is brought in and is told that the Lost Girl is trying to talk to him, but he can't see her. Eventually, he starts to hear her voice. One of the men then tells Smithy that the Lost Girl spoke of the person Smithy works for, and then hands Smithy a pistol, which would later be used by Nikki/Sue to kill the Phantom. So again, more associations of the Lost Girl's involvement guiding the resolution of killing the Phantom. We good? Logic checks out.
Logic is adjacent so far.
And then we have at the end the home scenes. After dying as Sue, at least in the sense that Nikki shot the Phantom, who then has Sue's face or Nikki's face. After that whole thing happens, Nikki appears to gain the ability to look through the Lost Girl's TV based on the way she looks at her almost fourth wall breaking.
Yeah, no, she looks past the fourth wall. Literally, she's looking past the fourth wall. You know why, Kalil? 1, 2, 3. There's 3 walls right around her.
Yep.
And she looks past onto the stage.
Yes.
That's the fourth wall. She breaks through that fourth wall, and she looks... Well, she doesn't break through it. She just kind of gazes through it in a...
Breaks it with her eye line.
She breaks it in a strange metaphysical sense later, but...
And the two women are running happily through the halls or out to the Lost Girl's room. Lost Girl sees herself on the TV, reflected, and then Nikki enters their room somehow.
Yes.
And kisses the Lost Girl, before disappearing.
This is where, again, if I go for the character-based interaction, like the recognition of looking on, despite her overall pain, suffering, and what she is going through, she sees the result of her overall pain being this sense of entertainment and something to give forward to someone. And that's when sort of like storylines collide in the respects that she accepts her lot and embraces and becomes one with the viewer at that sense, and as almost like a final parting, if you will.
What do you make of the emotion behind the kiss? Because it's a kiss on the lips. It's not like, kiss on the cheek, kiss on the forehead. And it is an American film where typically kiss on the lips is more romantic.
From the traveling woman through the dreams, she comes forward and just like grabs on and gives forward the kiss. Meanwhile, we kind of like see almost like an awkward sort of like arm on the side and arm in the air from the one who ends up receiving the kiss. In this case, again, I think that it's a character putting forward a sense of acceptance, becoming one with the individual. Meanwhile, this other individual is taken aback, if you will, still letting it in, but at the same token, almost kind of consider it as like the wave of influence, if you will. One is going to be a pushing force, while the other one is much more of the receiving force.
So you're
it's not
thinking
a mutual interaction.
It's less about the romantic implications of a kiss, more so the meeting of two forces and the way in which the two fit into that dynamic. Interesting. I mean, if we're going for romantic moments here, the lost girl then is shown to be entering Smithy's house, or at least the set of that, to reunite with her lover and now son.
Yeah, because there's a baby boy child.
Now, yes.
Well, there was technically before, because remember, inside of the script, inside of the overall, like, story, there was a woman with child, if you will.
Who is a different character.
Different kid, but how much does this parallel with one another, especially from this Polish woman?
It actually gets to be very, very, very confusing, and I've read some interesting interpretations on all of this.
Yeah.
Because if we're to be, I don't know, how should I put this? There are interpretations that would have it be that the lost girl had an abortion. Some people speculate. And we don't have any indications prior of there being a son. So some have gone so far as to say that this is the child that wasn't. That was aborted before could be developed and actually was a child. I don't know. It's not the same kid that we saw with Doris in the set where Nikki was doing the Sue voice and Billy was doing the Billy voice, but it was seeming real, and that was Doris. That doesn't seem to be the same boy.
Hear me out on this. This
is a mess.
This is where I know that I'm likely wrong in the sense, but if we consider, say, for example, when...
Was the boy recast?
No. Think about this case. This person walks through a door.
Yes. Shadows are born, evil's born,
and a
etc.
reflection follows. Could someone say that a child is a reflection of one's being?
Is the child evil?
The child could potentially. I'm thinking like maybe in a sense of if once before this overall reflection was more so a more violent individual, like the person in front of 47, and that person being sort of like shot off, not necessarily killed, but weakened, just kind of put into a more punitive form, smaller, but still present inside the home.
I'm not sold on this.
I'm not sold by it, but at the same time, if we take the logic of opening doors and then something comes through as a reflection, maybe, I don't know. Maybe, baby. Oh. You're the one for me. Maybe,
Bobby,
baby, I'm the one for you.
Bite the bullet.
On this tiny island. No one will get that reference.
Doris. Doris is a recurring character. You also may know her as Girl with Screwdriver. So, Doris, not Dorothy. Very important. No Wizard of Oz name there. Doris has been linked to the Who Is She woman by some fans. So the Who Is She woman, if you remember, is the woman whose back is turned toward the camera. She's facing forward, and we have the oftentimes called the Valley Girls. I think of them as sex workers, whatever you want to think of them as, but the other side character women would lean into the camera and say, "Who is she? who is she? So that's the who is she woman is who I'm talking about. I always found the visual aesthetic of the woman with the back turned with the black hair very ominously standing there. I find that effectively creepy in the Silent Hill kind of way because it's what I don't see. It's what I don't know. I don't know what her face looks like, and that's more terrifying than any scary face. Well, not any scary face. I was pretty scared by some of the faces in Mulholland Drive. But my point withstanding, the who is she woman is believed to have committed the original murder in Poland. So the interpretations I've seen is that she was married to the lover who the lost girl had been having the affair with. She was the wife of that man, and that she was the one who ended up killing the husband, and that's where the murder came in. That the Phantom and the lost girl, when they talked in the street about someone dying, having been a murder, that was the lost girl's lover being killed by the wife, who is the who is she woman. I hope my words make sense as I'm saying them. I feel like I've probably missaid names somewhere in that soup. But this would make sense. The who is she woman followed her husband up a staircase, stabbed him with a screwdriver, killing him, and then presumably killing herself, as we later see, always see, timelines weird see, her lying and dead of a stab wound. This would also then link to why Doris is shown to have the screwdriver impaled in herself when she's hiding the screwdriver through the bandages.
That was a visual.
So the main evidence linking Doris, not Dorothy. Who would ever see Dorothy? Doris
Click,
to the
click.
who is she woman is that Doris realizes her husband had an affair with Sue. A flash of the dead who is she woman appears at that moment, and that seems to be the moment when she imprints on who she's supposed to kill based on the Phantom controlling Doris and telling Doris that you'll know who to kill when you see her. That's Sue, because it's a recreation of the situation from before where she committed a murder after the affair. But the last time it was the husband, this time it's the other woman, I think. And they both have a thing for killing people with screwdrivers, so they're basically the same person.
It's just a nice little. Maybe that's the quirk. That's the quirky behavior.
That's not like most girls. This one has more screwdriver murders to brag about.
Oh, no.
So with this Detective Hutchinson guy, we see her again have the screwdriver in her. That the only explanation I can have for why the screwdriver is in her is if it's supposed to hint again at the idea that she had killed herself in the previous life or is being possessed by the idea of the person who had killed themselves with the screwdriver. So it's in her for that reason. Otherwise, I really struggle to come up with why she has the screwdriver. It's not a very convenient place to store your anything.
No.
I wouldn't recommend, like, if you're worried you need a pen and you're always losing your pens, I don't recommend you put it through your appendix. I really don't recommend that.
If you want a nice sheen, just put it through your spleen.
Yeah, I don't know about that, man. And we're shown again, it's the Phantom who hypnotized her. Doris says she'll know who to kill when she sees them. We then see her at Billy's house in what may or may not be the movie because it's, again, done in accents, but it seems based on the reaction of the wife and child that this is not supposed to be happening right now, but are they just good actors or is it real? Who knows? Anyway,
everything is real.
Something happens where Doris sees Sue, has the imagining of the who is she woman, and then later Doris is seen attacking Nikki/Sue in the street with the screwdriver and then waddling away.
Waddle.
So, are you sold on the idea that the who is she woman killed her husband because she found out about the affair, then killed herself with the screwdriver, and then later Doris was hypnotized by the Phantom to do this again, but this time to attack Nikki/Sue? How much does this logic track to you?
I think that things fated to happen yet again, if you will, in some sort
It's
of cursed
happening
format.
again.
I think that's just a popular way to sort of spin the narrative. You could say what overall David Lynch's intentions are on saying, like, oh, yes, these things are fated to happen once again, and the cycle may never break unless it potentially is broken. But on the same token, I'm still trying to piece together how the cycle was broken, if you will, or if the cycle even was broken. By
killing the Phantom who is yourself?
But I didn't really get asserted that was, like, from the look of the Phantom at the time, it looked like it was less he was dying and more like he was orgasming into her own face. and then the face just kind of got more twisted. It's like when inside of a movie, you have a brick house fall into someone, but as long as you don't see like the limbs or like any of the bodies, as long as you don't see the bodies sort of like looking dead, that means they could potentially be alive. That's just how like the movie magic
As long
works.
as the brick house is tucked somewhere behind the woods where you can't see it from the road.
I'm pretty sure the 99-year-old niece is still alive, but sure.
So this brings me to probably, I don't know, there's a lot of weird things in this movie. This might be the most ridiculous part to talk about are the rabbits. When we talked about rabbits as a short series, film, whatever you want to consider it, I did not tell you it was going to be literally an Inland Empire.
No, and after I saw it in Inland Empire, I was waiting for when Dumbland would come up because for some reason you paired
Dumbland
those two.
is still coming up in the return. Put a pin in that. But
why?
As far as
It's like, dude, I'm just gonna make a guess right here, right now. I'm pretty sure that we're just gonna see Dumbland being the new invitation to love that's gonna appear on people's TVs.
Okay, that's a good guess.
There you go.
So anyway, as I was saying with rabbits here, though, I personally am of the opinion, based on everything we've heard and talked about with the production, I don't think David Lynch knew he was going to use rabbits in Inland Empire. I don't think he had any intentions of using it for anything outside of what it already was being uploaded to this web series on the internet. I think later he repurposed it. Mm-hmm. So I don't think any of our analysis of rabbits needs the context of Inland Empire, because I think that when Rabbits was made, it was being made in a vacuum outside of it. It now just gets a new light. I'm less interested in the other rabbits and the scenarios they're in. I'm more interested in Jack Rabbit specifically in this movie, because we see him leave, and we get to see where he goes, and he seems to become other people. So Jack Rabbit is a notable character in this movie, and it's ridiculous. This somehow is important. It's like when you're following a piece of media and you find out that this side character in a spin-off story actually is incredibly important. That's what this feels like right now, and it's weird. So there are three characters that people have linked Jack Rabbit to potentially either become, or he's letting them through somehow. I'm just going to list them here, okay? So we got Janek, or Yannick. Jack sits in the chair, and then he becomes this character when meeting with the Phantom. It's early on in the movie. It's the first time we see Jack Rabbit leave the room. And Janek speaks to the Phantom in Polish, asks if he's looking to go in. Phantom replies he's looking for an opening. Phantom then yells that he is glad that Yannick understands, and Yannick fades away in a sort of blur, as though he was never really there the whole time. So whether you interpret Jack Rabbit to literally become Yannick, or Yannick is the form he chooses in this world that he's in, or he's the opening or doorway. There is a weird parallel where Jack sits in the chair and then Yannick becomes that position. He's in the same chair through a weird blurring effect. We also see Yannick again later in the film with Smithy in Poland trying to find the Phantom when they're driving to that trailer in the woods. Yannick is in the car. So he worked with the Phantom in the sense of, do you want to get a way in? Do you want to find a way in? I can hook you up here, potentially. I don't think he ever actually offers it, but it's like implied as an offering. And that might make him seem like he's helping the Phantom, right? But then later he is helping Smithy try to find a way to potentially kill the Phantom, so it's a bit unclear what's going on here. He's kind of playing both sides of the proverbial swing set.
I mean, if you were a rabbit trapped inside of a perpetual hell sitcom and you wanted a way out, I think that potentially, you kind of had to play both sides. Because otherwise, the Phantom's just right outside the door making creepy faces. May turn into your face and make weird faces too.
The next one's Mr. K. We see Jack Rabbit sit in the chair, and then the person in the chair is Mr. K, who speaks to Nikki and Sue in those multiple sequences where, again, it's like she's just talking about all these weird, violent people in her life that she's known or heard about, or her own experiences. And Mr. K hardly says anything at all. He just mostly just sits there, almost like, again, it's a therapy session or something. That possibly links back to the idea of that Laura Dern talking to God sort of situation. Jack Rabbit becomes Mr. K. And at one point, he leaves to go to a phone, and it takes him a while to answer the phone, the same way that Jack Rabbit takes a while to answer the phone when he's in the rabbit's room.
Yeah.
And eventually he goes to answer the phone. We don't hear the other side, but Mr. K says, "Hello? Yeah, she's still here. I don't think it'll be too much longer now. Yeah. The horse to the well. Yeah. Crimp? Yeah. He's around here someplace, that's for sure. And we get later indications that Crimp is the Phantom.
Yes.
That's another name for him. So the fact that he's talking about the Phantom over the phone, answering the phone the same way that Jackrabbit does, indicating the horse to the well, which later, horse to the well ends up being used by the third iteration, potentially, who is Derek at the seance, who uses, again, that same phrase of the horse to the well as Mr. K does. Suspicious. Notably also about Mr. K, before I move on to Derek, Mr. K is also seen at the theater, and that when Nikki follows him up the stairs, that's where she finds the gun that she uses to kill the Phantom. The same gun that Derek had been presenting to Smithy in the seance scene. So there is this absolutely bizarre situation where Jackrabbit appears to become Yannick, to invite the Phantom in, become Mr. K to talk through Sue and Nikki's emotions and situations and also provide her with the gun, and then also talk to Smithy during the seance to also prep, however that matters. I don't understand that part. Why does Smithy have a gun and then why does it go to her later? I don't get it.
Because that's the thing. If you look at inside of the respects of this film, it does make much sense. But if you look at it in the respects of Rabbits, it was just a ploy all along.
So
it's just all part of the elaborate plan.
And Rabbits does have the idea of a man in a green suit, and we do see a man in a green suit here as a form of Smithy, I believe.
Yes.
So good. I don't know about that.
Good.
That same green color apparently was also associated with the gun, because I remember someone talking about how like that was the material that the gun was on was that same shade of green. Maybe.
The man in the green suit is death.
Do you interpret Jackrabbit as becoming these three people or something else? Like, what do you make of the Rabbit's inclusion, and specifically Jackrabbit?
I think the Rabbit's inclusion are some of the more mystical backstage helper hands, if you will, that sort of move the story along. I think that if
you're giant, you're man from the place, that sort of deal.
Or if you want to bring forward, say, for example, a meta example, writers. Like individuals that are revising things, but at the end of the day, guiding the character towards the inevitable goal, and that will overall help their overall means, to the point that it's finally met at the very end, in which the character is finally caught up to them.
Could also be the rabbit ears. Again, the idea of the electricity. It could be the literal metaphor of like the literal metaphor. What am I talking about? A literal metaphorical television show walking around.
Yeah.
That he is the broadcast. He is the current. He is the opening, in the sense that the electrical current is what allows the show to be put on the TV screen, or the movie to be put onto the screen, and that's the kind of opening he presents the Phantom. The Phantom works movie magic. There is opening for a meta-interpretation of this that would fit really well in line with a lot of the meta-interpretations we've put forward occasionally throughout Lynch's work, and it's very similar in line, I think, although I don't remember if it was ever brought up specifically, by the Twin Perfect video explaining Twin Peaks, because in that Twin Perfect video explaining Twin Peaks, he does go through examples of electricity. I don't remember if he brought up Inland Empire. It's a 4-hour video I watched 2 years ago, okay? Bear with me. But if it isn't in Twin Perfect video, I could see how it could be used that way. That if the rabbit ears are the electrical avenue, that's a song. Take me to Electric Avenue. I don't know how it goes, but that could be the pathway for the movie magic to happen. And then the movie magic gets shot by the actor. I don't understand anything.
You keep going down this rabbit hole, and
rabbit holes.
I am very impressed.
This is the one podcast where I get to be the unhinged conspiracy theorist.
You get to be as unhinged as you'd like. Enjoy every single moment.
And I want to be clear, I don't even really care about this that much. In the sense that I love the movie for the aesthetic and the way it feels. I don't really necessarily need to understand the film to enjoy it. And it's not like, if anything, I would actually argue, if I tried to enjoy this film intellectually, I think I'd be let down, because I don't think it's a very satisfying narrative to just watch and read. Like, if I was reading the script for this movie and I was just like, oh yes, what a great work of literature.
Well, it's not a script, you see, because every single script is a feeling of the direction at the time.
preserved in amber after the fact, after it died, the Jurassic Park. But it's the fact that like by the end of it, when the Lost Girl and Sue/Nikki are kissing after the shooting of the Phantom, I'm not sure what I'm looking at. And even if I understood it intellectually, would it even be worth it? Would I feel much? I don't think so, because it doesn't really matter to me what's going on here. The lack of understanding, the feeling of just being pulled along in a nightmare is what I love about it. So when I'm paradoxically trying to understand it for the sake of this podcast, I enjoy the fun of doing this. I enjoy the fun of talking about it, but it doesn't change what I really love about the film. And next time I watch Inland Empire, yeah, I might be thinking about some of these things, but I'd much rather just shut my brain off and just let myself get dragged through the corridors.
Well, just shut our brain off for
Silent
this
Hill.
podcast.
It's Silent Hill. Actually, that's a good comparison as Silent Hill.
Silent Hill.
Even if you're not a fan of the games, all you need to know is that, yes, weird, creepy things happen in Silent Hill. That sounded like Courage the Cowardly Dog for a moment, but weird, creepy things happen in Silent Hill. And there are ways to interpret all of the monsters and creatures as having a reason for being there, especially in Silent Hill 2, where it's very psychological. But that's not the main thing people usually love about Silent Hill. They love the
that
atmosphere.
Pyramid Head can be a go-kart racer.
They love the atmosphere and the feeling of it that so few other things, video game or otherwise, can capture. Yes, it matters what happens, and yes, the lore and the story can be interesting, but usually what draws people to something like Silent Hill, or in this case, Inland Empire, is that raw feeling. So, other characters rounding out the cast here. We've got the Valley Girls. They're referred to the Valley Girls by David Lynch on set, so that's the terminology people use online.
Yeah.
I do think of them as sex workers, although the confirmation on that is pretty loose.
Yep.
They play several different roles. We see them in the household setting with Nikki/Sue, with the terrible furniture, talking in that setting. We also see them in Poland occasionally with the flashback moments. And then we also see them on the street in the city on the corner, which is where they seem the most like sex workers based on their style of dress and location.
As far as these characters are, especially in their large quantity, they almost feel like, what's the term for those characters that would make commentary in the background of like a play or performance?
A chorus.
Yeah, they feel like a chorus.
Which is exactly what the Inland Empire Wiki does refer to them as, among other things.
Yes,
so
I got one!
The Inland Empire Wiki calls them alternately acting as Greek chorus, spirit guides, friends, and mocking bullies.
Yeah, for the most part, they feel like a chorus, or at the very least, potentially like voices in the mind of the character supposed to be in that spot. And when I say
whether it's the Lost Girl, or Sue, or Nikki, or possibly even Doris.
Yes. Choose your fighter.
You and I have to at least acknowledge the strange writing and scenarios that encounter with these girls.
Oh, we've acknowledged it multiple times off pod.
Let's do it on pod.
On pod right now, I gotta say, knowing that David Lynch was the sole person who ended up directing this, who ended up writing this, this old man, like, writing out on how it's like, my boobs, like, not David Lynch isn't talking about his boobs and flashing them all over the place. No, I mean, like, there's literally a sense in a very almost like exploitative feeling of just one of the women just like saying like, yeah, my boobs will get them, and then flashes the boobs for like a good like.
It's the only part of Inland Empire where I could really look at it and say maybe you shouldn't. But where I will be willing to defend it, and this is a weak defense, I do think, but I like how weird it feels because none of this happens organically. The lines are stilted. It makes no sense for her to suddenly just reveal her breasts like that. It's so unexpected and so just what is happening that it kind of adds further to the disorientation of that moment. It's already like shortly after Nikki/Sue has entered the set and reality's starting to crumble. So she's just like half awake, sitting against the wall, staring at these people who are suddenly in this living room and talking to each other. And then she looks over and one of them starts doing that. It just adds to the feeling of what? But that being said, I could definitely see someone saying it feels very kind of sleazy for David Lynch to write this in there, and it feels very like forced into the scene.
Especially when you're considering like how everything was sort of like filmed and just like organized and so on. It doesn't feel like, and like a lot of the bits of the film, that each sort of like piece was meant to sort of like lead up to another in a like larger sense.
It doesn't clearly go anywhere.
Yes.
there have been some commentaries done about the effect of this being shot on a digital camera from around this time period, where most movies didn't look and feel like Inland Empire. This feels more like a home movie, except a home movie that's 3 hours long and incredibly cryptic and weird and whatever. But this is one of those scenes where I think the fact that it was shot on this homemade camera really does change the feel of it for maybe certain parts of the audience. Because if this was shot on traditional film and looked the same way as Mulholland Drive, it would still be a weird feeling moment. But because it's shot on this handheld, shaky camera from like commercial grade 2003, 2002 technology, it feels like a home video. Which, because of the nature of the scene, this feels pornographic almost. Not just because of nudity, but because of close-up nudity from handheld camera. It feels like someone's homemade, like, you know, private collection of films that they might have made. More than studio film. And for a movie that already feels unreal and kind of raw, this is a very strange moment that just kind of abruptly happens to you. So I don't personally find it super objectionable. I don't even necessarily know if there's much to be bothered by with it. It is simply female nudity without much context. If we do take these characters to be sex workers, I guess that's their relationship to their body, is they don't necessarily mind showing that to the other women around them. They're comfortable with each other that way. I have seen some interpretations actually read this as a moment where the women are comfortable in this space together without men being around, that they are comfortable with their bodies this way. I just feel like this isn't how people normally act in the people I know. And it feels kind of weird to watch this.
Is there hypothetically a group of individuals that may overall partake on this? Yes,
there absolutely is hypothetically a group. It is still unusual to my understanding, but I am also not in this group of people.
I'm not in this group of people. I'm not so convinced that...
There's not much of a male equivalent where all of a sudden men start taking off their shirts and admiring each other's pecs. Like, that's just not a thing.
Perhaps that is the case, like David Lynch is trying to emulate. That's what I would get for the largest point, though, is that, like, if this was David Lynch's idea, suggestion, the thing he wrote, the thing that he ended up directing, do I believe that as far as, like, David Lynch goes, like, how much stock do I put in David Lynch's use of this scene, as well as, like, reflecting it on people? Like, how much stock do I put into that? And I don't put much stock into that, unfortunately.
I will just say, regardless of intentions, it accomplishes the effect for me of making me confused and uncomfortable.
Good.
And Inland Empire, making me confused and uncomfortable, is par for the course. So that's kind of why I don't mind the scene, although I could see objections to it, and I don't know what his intentions were behind it, but the effect works. Other character is Carolina. Really small role, but when Nikki/Sue is trying to get into the club, which in real world is called 40 Deuce, it just seems notable considering 42, 47, anyway.
Thank you.
The bouncer won't let her in until suddenly she points at a woman inside and shouts, "I know that girl, Carolina. I know Carolina." Now, whether she actually knows Carolina, unclear what their history is, but she is allowed inside. And after sitting for a while, Carolina whispers something to Nikki/Sue and points the way to Mr. K, which then obviously leads to the situation with meeting Mr. K, getting the gun later, etc. But notably, the way that she does this pointing, Carolina points forward in a very similar way that the Phantom might point with the hands, or the Visitor might point with the finger. It almost seems to guide or control the movement. Either like a hypnosis or like a magic. So there's been some speculation about that.
Ooh.
Get those hands away from me.
They are away from you. I'm not touching you. My magic is.
And because we need more meta elements to the story, there's two Carolinas in terms of the actors. So the Lost Girl is played by Carolina Gruska, and the girl who escorts Sue backstage at the club is called Carolina Sarasola. So the moment where she points and says, "I know Carolina," she's then let in, and a different person whose real actor name is Carolina guides her in, and then the Lost Girl is Carolina. "I know Carolina." She says, "I know Carolina," and the Lost Girl's name is Carolina in real life. And then they smooch.
And then they smooch.
And I'm so lost.
And, well, you see, okay, now here's...
It's just, it's too much of a coincidence.
Think about polarities, okay? There's a northern polarity and there's a southern polarity. North Carolina, South Carolina. It all comes together when you think about it in funny words.
To me, it's too coincidental that the lost girl is named Carolina for that not to have been on purpose. Right? Like, it's just too much. Because the lost girl already has such a strong connection to this character that Laura Dern plays. So to have it be that in order to get into the club, that allows her to get the weapon, that allows her to kill the Phantom and then go to the lost girl, that she has to get in with the bouncer saying, I know Carolina. And the lost girl's actor is Carolina. It's like so meta. Again, she could see her through the TV. Now she's reaching out and seeing the name on the script. The lost girl played by Carolina. It's too much. It's too much for me not to like read into that. Find that very curious.
Very curious indeed, but on the same notion.
You know, a word kind of sounds like curious.
Carolina.
Circus.
Ah, that was close.
Close. So the circus, as it's in Polish, I'm going to say it wrong, Cirque Zuluski, Zuluski, whatever. The traveling circus in the Baltic region. We do get characters there. Obviously, Smithy and the Phantom tour with that circus. They also attend a backyard party where at 3 o'clock, roughly, Smithy gets ketchup on his shirt that leads, again, to the possible vision of the lost girl.
By the way, just so that everyone is clear on this who haven't seen this, it's not like a dabble of ketchup. It is not like a bit of ketchup.
It's a blood stain.
No, it's a gunshot. It's a bottle. It's a bottle of ketchup. Like, imagine if, like, a man just poured a bottle of ketchup and just, like, centered it on his chest and then turned around and was like, honey, where are the paper towels?
Yeah, it's clearly representing someone being killed, either shot or more likely stabbed with a screwdriver in this particular case.
Yeah.
Apparently, the Phantom's job at the circus was to work up the crowd by doing some sort of thing on people with his hands. Ooh. One night, the Phantom was involved in a barroom fight. Everyone involved was arrested, including many circus clowns. But when the group was taken to the station, the Phantom had vanished. So even though the Elephant Man, there's no like actor, I don't think, in common with this, there is a circus, which I would say spiritually is carrying on the Elephant Man. Again, every David Lynch film is here in some way, right? Right? Let's just go through it. Eraserhead. What's Eraserhead in here? Obviously, we weren't able to have Jack Nance in the cast. But it just feels the most like Eraserhead. It's the most DIY like Eraserhead. You've also got the element of like so much abstraction and mystery and uncertainty of what's going on.
Yeah.
I think that it's not, there's no character or event that reminds me specifically of Eraserhead.
I think, but
just the feeling.
Just the feeling as well as just how it's just generally made. So as a template, we could call it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a template. Elephant Man, again, I would say the circus. Dune? I struggle with trying to draw a connection to Dune.
I think that if we are to assume, like, the way that this film is being treated...
The sort of way the Too Many Cooks idea, if we take your theory...
Yeah.
Dune was the Too Many Cooks situation.
Yeah.
Same with Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks also, obviously, skipping ahead, has the idea of Cooper in the Red Room, which feels very reminiscent here. And obviously Grace Zabriskie returning. You've got Blue Velvet. You've talked about the idea of the Wanderer, Jeffrey, having a little control of what's going on. I think there's something to be said with that. Frank almost appears as a nightmarish figure, the way that the Phantom may appear. Wild at Heart, we've got Laura Dern returning, as well as Blue Velvet, obviously. But then also we've got the mother of Laura Dern being in the movie with the Wizard of Oz type sound effect that I read into. Lost Highway, you've got the fracturing of the self, leading into different individuals who parallel each other. Potential of it being a death dream exists in this one as well.
Mm-hmm. And, of course...
There's the murder. There's the sort of guilt of a murder.
Yeah, and then there's Mulholland Drive, in which reflections, murder...
Rabbits.
Actors. Rabbits.
Mm-hmm.
Dumbland
is in the veins.
Dumbland is what?
In the veins.
In what veins?
In the Empire veins.
No, I think it's in your vanity. No, get that out of here. No, we're done with that.
What's certainly in there is Axon N. Not Axon In, Axon N, the letter N. It is introduced to us at the very beginning as the longest-running radio play in history. The show itself appears to be in Polish, but announcers speak it in English. The announcer says the show is continuing in the Baltic region, a gray winter day in an old hotel. We see footage at the beginning of the movie of a man and a woman walking down a hotel hallway. Woman says she doesn't recognize the hallway, says she doesn't have a key, but the man claims that she gave the key to him. They go into the room, which she also says she doesn't recognize. We find out that she's a sex worker. They have sex, and he says he'll tell her exactly what he wants. And we then see shortly after, presumably after the sex scene had happened, she's crying, sitting alone on the bed, which ties directly into the Lost Girl crying, sitting alone on the bed with the blanket covering her body. So is Axon N, it says it's a radio play, so the footage we see at the beginning that's not in English, right? That we see at the beginning. I thought it was French, but it says here Polish. But either way, like that scene with the sex worker woman, is that Axon N or not? We see a record being played, right?
So I'm just making sure, like, as far as, like, IMs go, Axon N, is it an actual thing in reality, or is it simply in the fiction?
This is in the movie.
If it is, I'm pretty sure it's, again, more recycling, if you will. If Axon N is, in this sense, a radio play, it is something that goes across the sound waves, or, like, some form of like sound that will bring people in and make them wake up to overall new realities.
Considering
and so
Lynch's appreciation for sound, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that this is just Axon In, but now on vinyl.
So almost what I imagine is it's the sound of the radio play, and we're getting the images that are hazy because we're picturing it in our minds.
Bingo.
But the actual audio would be the radio drama itself.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting. We're getting the voices without the context of the images. Nikki and Sue see the words Axon N scrawled on an alleyway door, and that's when she goes into it. She's transported to stage 4, and she ends up on the other side of the set of On High and Blue Tomorrows, where previously she had been sitting with the actor and directors and writers and everyone, and they had seen someone moving. She now is the person moving on the set.
Yes.
We also see Axon N written on chalk on a door on Hollywood Boulevard. This time it's unclear where the arrow is pointing. Sue then looks across the street and sees herself with this other Sue making a mocking grin at her, and this is when she realizes Doris is coming to kill her. We also see a door labeled Axon N when Nikki goes to confront the Phantom. It leads her to Sue's house where she finds the gun used to kill the Phantom. So Axon N, if we take it to be the sound waves that are guiding, it isn't too different than Jackrabbit being the potential electric waves that are guiding, if we're taking my little theory there.
Yes.
That both Axon N and Jackrabbit, the electricity and the sound, you put the visual and the audio together, you get the dream. You get the film. I was less sold on this interpretation until we started talking, but the more I'm talking, this feels like it could be part of it. It's not all of it, though. I don't think any part of it is all of it.
I don't think that it's ever going to be all of it. But at the same time, I don't think that there's ever a point, or at the very least for a majority of Lynch's work, with the exception of Straight Story.
Straight Story is a straight story. It's really based on something, yeah.
That there is just like a singular intention, a singular idea, a singular meaning.
As far as what Axon N means, some people have speculated that Axon N sounds like action, which is what the director says when they're starting a film, starting a shooting.
Ha.
Action, axon. I'm less sold on that. I think of more of the axons that are like in the brain or in the body that transmit electrical and chemical signals, right? That tell one information to the other part of the body to another.
Yeah.
I think of that part of the axon. There's kind of a reason why I think that's a bit of a pin.
What do you mean there's a pin?
As a pin.
There's only so many episodes
for
we
the
got
idea of
left.
an axon. As a pin in the axon.
Stop hitting me with pins.
With electricity, this film also has red and blue light bulbs. I'm good to kind of just go quickly through this because we've talked about light bulbs a lot with David Lynch's films, and maybe there's something in particular you want to say.
Blue.
So, red light bulb is shown with a lampshade in the storage and office room in Sue and Smithy's house. We see this lamp start to react weirdly, where it like freaks out for a while and then like dims. It potentially is like summoning things or revealing things. When Sue goes to Crimp's backyard with the circus backdoor festival thingy that's happening, Crimp/Phantom ominously has a translucent red light bulb in his mouth, which flashes a prompting image of the red lamp, so it's indicating that these are connected.
That's the sound of my mouth I'd make if I put a light bulb in.
I don't know about
maybe.
you, but I actually found the red light bulb in the mouth to be kind of eerie the first few times I watched it.
No, it is an eerie
It worked for me.
It worked.
It's silly when you think about it, but it was weird. It worked. He just kind of appears behind a tree with a light bulb in his mouth.
And she grabs the screwdriver and runs away. Yes.
We also have a lamp with a red shade appearing when the old Polish men hold the seance. And then seemingly the only electric light in the room is that red light bulb.
The usage of red as well as the red curtains inside the same places.
We have the red lamp appearing behind Sue when she sits down in the 40 Deuce Club. So I guess the red reminds me most of the Phantom. Most of the appearances of the red light involves something about the Phantom. That's the through line I would read into it.
Yeah. No, I think again, like the big processing unit, if we are to like use relative terms between like what David Lynch has used in the past, the big processing unit is probably the Phantom, the one that is causing the most mayhem in order to make our character react to said mayhem.
And then we have the blue light, which is more often associated with Nikki and Sue. The blue light flashes once when Nikki enters the Axon N door for the first time. We also get, when the appearance of the Valley Girls starts, we get a red lamp. The red lamp shorts out, and then the blue lamp lights up when she's transported with the Valley Girls.
Okay.
After Nikki kills the Phantom, a bright blue light signals the Lost Girl's freedom. And then shortly after, we see a blue light in the rabbit's home. And the film projector also looks like a blue light as well, when the film projector is literally on her face, and she is being filmed, and that shows up on the screen. Blue light, blue light, blue light. Also, the very first shot of this movie is from a film projector. And as a last note, because at some point we should acknowledge it, David Lynch is in this movie as a cameo, playing the lighting tech Bucky J, who talks to the director, played by Jeremy Irons. Notably, Bucky J, the character name, is from a nickname Richard Bamer, the actor who played Ben Horn. He called David Lynch Bucky J. I have no clue why. It's a very strange thing to call David Lynch. I'm sure there's an inside joke behind it. Mm-hmm. But Bucky J is literally the nickname of David Lynch, and he's playing the lighting technician. Lighting technician. He's in charge of the light bulbs.
What? Scott.
I'm losing my voice trying to talk about Inland Empire.
Kalil, do you want me to pod a little over here?
I can't shout, Professor.
Kalil.
I'm losing my voice.
Is there? Oh, damn it.
And the most confusing thing for me, and this is a confusing movie, is all the references to animals. There's characters who are said to be, like, animal people. They love animals. They know it's their nature. Freddy says that he used to raise rabbits. He has watched dogs reason their way out of the trickiest situations. Freddy, notably, that is the assistant to director Kingsley on the movie set. He's the one
familiar face.
He's the one being played by Harry Dean Stanton. A little side note on Freddy.
Who played a cowboy, and what do cowboys do? They take care of animals.
Okay. The role of Kingsley's assistant was originally going to have been played by Freddie Jones, who appeared in Lynch's The Elephant Man, Dune, Wild at Heart, and on episode 4 of On the Air.
That could have been the Dune entry. Well, yeah, no, Freddy is going to be playing Freddy,
but Freddy would have been playing
Freddy.
Freddy. The Lynch 2 documentary shows Lynch on the phone explaining that Jones was flying to America to play the role when he experienced vertigo in Heathrow Airport and went to the hospital because he could not stand up. The documentary also shows Lynch discussing possible replacement actors, still apparently committed to taking on the character as a British accent. The documentary shows how the replacement became Harry Dean Stanton, and he tried to get that British accent to work, but ultimately that concept was obviously abandoned, so that is why he does not have the British accent, whereas the director does.
Yeah, and say he has like somewhat of like
Harry Dean Stanton voice.
Harry Dean Stanton voice?
He sounds like Harry Dean Stanton. Well, I don't have ever heard him ever use a very different voice.
Yeah, no, I think it's less like, as far as like Harry Dean Stanton goes, I heard kind of like almost like a Midwestern style, almost like a little slurred, like, and kind of speaks in sort of this cadence. So it's more flat in this respect. I think that he's reaching more so a very neutral voice with this one. But still, overall, good performance.
Yeah. Then there's Smithy, who is hired by the circus to take care of animals. He said that it was said I have a way with animals, and he's seen taking care of the horses. And then one of the street people says of Nico that there are those who are good with animals who have a way with animals, and Nico has that pet monkey. So, Professor, we have 3 seemingly disconnected, unrelated characters from different parts of the world. We have the film crew, we've got Smithy from Poland, and then we've got a street person in LA in the movie, potentially, They all talk about animal people and people who are good with animals. Why?
Well, I think that when it comes down to it, for one, I think that this film was shot in like different points of time in which maybe they meant different things at those points. Number two, we literally have that last character sort of like return with the other characters mentioned, if you will, in the final room, but also see...
You mean Nico with the monkey?
Nico with the monkey,
Okay.
as well as the one-legged individual. But yes.
I have no clue what to do with the animal part. I literally do not know. I struggle to make any sense of this.
The best that I can do is something that is very far-reaching and just making assumptions on David Lynch's sort of like idea when it comes to animals. Every time that animals are used, it's either A, in parallel with people, in which maybe they are just more so good with overall corralling people and getting them to do what they want them to do, similar to how Freddy ends up sort of like convincing everyone that like, hey, I need some money for this guy. And it's almost like a little trick that he does, almost Pavlov's dog, like ring a bell, he's able to bring in the money in that respect. It could be in the respects that maybe these beings that are relative to people are also like some form of mythicalness, if you will, and people who end up being better with animals might be able to reach out to people all the easier. Again, like, I feel like the more that I go into the animals, the more I feel like I'm reaching. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I don't know how to reach anymore with that.
So
I can
with
find
like my
something
surface level thing with Freddy. I'll go with that.
I can find a lot to say about most things that are confusing in this movie, but there's still that thing I can't explain, and that's animals.
It's the
struggle.
imperfect quilt.
That's what makes it perfect, or the imperfect. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know.
No, that is an ideology which I thoroughly enjoy.
It's an ideology someone could have. Ending credits. You mentioned before that we get Nico with her monkey. She's wearing the blonde wig. We get the Marine sister with one leg. She's the one that says sweet at the start. We get a character played by Laura Haring, I'm still not sure how to say it, from Mulholland Drive, and she blows the kiss to Nikki on the couch. We get the lumberjack sawing log, and we get the piano player, likely played by Ben Harper. Credits are weird. There's a very elongated finale scene with this Sinnerman musical number that's not really in any other David Lynch film quite this way. And it feels like, a big send-off for this movie.
It feels like a send-off for the movie in the respects of like an end credit scene like you'd see from like a Shrek situation. But it also feels like almost like a rap party for the individuals there.
And it's the individuals there that are suspicious. So most suspicious of all would be the reoccurrence of the actor who was in Mulholland Drive. Because we've got her playing an unknown character, potentially just one of the same characters. This could be Camilla Rhodes. This could be a variation on who she was at the beginning of the movie. But we get this actor, and she blows the kiss to Nikki on the couch as though there's some sense of familiarity. But there's no context of who this is.
Nope.
She also was one of the rabbits. But is she representing that character? I think she'd be in the rabbit suit if that was the case.
I think she would be.
Or at least like have a rabbit... like a literal rabbit on her lap or something. Like something else to indicate if that was the case. So I think the main thing is the actor choice. If we don't have a character to tie it to, I think it's the fact that he chose the person from Mulholland Drive, which again is mighty suspicious.
Because there's that little, like, it could be considered very friendly, could be considered flirtatious, like interaction from afar.
Yeah.
In which is like a nice little, like, what was the, like a wink, a blow of the kiss?
I said, blow the kiss.
Blow of the kiss, yep. Before she then holds the hands of another person.
And we get Nico again in here, but in the story that was being told to us with the street person, and that's how the credits say is street person, so I'm just going to go with that because we don't have a name. But with the Nico storyline, she was dying. Like, it was pretty clear that she had a hole in her vagina that led to her insides that she was basically believing she didn't have much time left. She seemed like a very tragic character. So when she appears with the monkey here, this has led to some speculation among people that this is an afterlife. That has been a speculation I've heard. Because this character may be dead.
Laura Palmer gets like one little angel floating above the sky, and then we get a whole dance routine for this. But it's like the afterlife seems to be a little bit unfair.
And then if we see Nikki here or Sue here, we do know that she did shoot a phantom that had her face. Is she dead? Maybe. Who knows? Is Nikki even a person?
Do you
Does
know?
Nikki exist? Did she ever exist? Does she exist now? What's going on with Nikki? I don't know what it even means to ask what happened to Nikki after Inland Empire. I don't even know what that question means. And that's not a normal situation to be in a movie. Because at least I can say The Lost Girl ended the movie reuniting with the lover and the child. I don't know if Nikki, she faded out. Like, I don't know. She faded out the same way that we saw, like, Yannick fade out at the beginning.
Yep.
As an electrical current almost. We don't even know. I do want to pose the possibility, though, that I take the man sawing the log. I'm taking it to be the idiom sawing logs, that a lot of times, if it's said in an English language, though, they're sawing logs, it's an old way of saying they're sleeping.
I'm taking it as the representation. I was like, yes, symphony. Yeah, I did that too.
I really think of it as they're sawing logs. It's representing that this is a dream or that death is the big sleep. Either way, there is the idea of dreaming and sleeping being conveyed through sawing of the log. I'm taking it in the sense of how would Lynch describe it? Yes, sawing logs.
So, like, maybe this is me reaching out too far then? Why does he have, like, this person who seems to be dressed up appropriately for the job when potentially anyone else could have, like, even the background individuals come around to
Well,
saw
we
that
all
log?
know about the lumberjack of sleep.
What?
The very familiar American archetype.
The American folktale, just right next to
There's Paul Bunyan,
Pecos Bill, and
lumberjack of sleep.
Lumberjack Sleep.
Yep. There's the use of the song Sinner Man in the movie, too, which some people have taken to be a religious connotation. Again, if it's the afterlife, you could take something from that. Lynch, when he was directing the dancers, when directing the singing, he said, when you sing those... Oh, sorry, David Lynch. When you sing those things, feel those things. You're singing to the Lord. Quote David Lynch. So, I don't know. Is it the afterlife? Are they singing literally to the Lord? I don't know. What is happening in the credits? Is it... I don't want to spoil this TV show. There is a TV drama that also ended the last episode with people being in a form of afterlife. That was a very controversial ending to a show. If you know what I'm talking about, and there's a decent chance you do if I've described it well enough and you've seen it, it kind of reminds me of that.
Oh, Twin Peaks.
Yes, Twin Peaks. So, Inland Empire is open to a lot of different interpretations.
Inland Empire is filled with interpretations, is the biggest sort of takeaway that we can really get from this, because I don't think that there's going to be the most solid of answers that we're going to be able to supply here. And I think that is to the film's benefit.
Yes. Might be the best thing it has going for it for a lot of people. When asked what Inland Empire was about, Lynch refrained himself from explaining the film, as you'd expect, responding that it is about a woman in trouble, and it's a mystery, and that's all I want to say about it. Lynch has also offered a clue in the form of a quotation from the Hindu Upanishads. This is the quote that he would give to help understand the movie. From the Upanishads, "We are like the spider. We weave our life and then move along on it. We are like the dreamer who dreams and then lives in the dream. This is true for the entire universe." Again, he made this film shortly after returning from a very spiritual experience, right? So I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that in the way that Eraserhead may have been based on the Bible, it isn't hard to believe that this film did grow out of the sort of Hindu, Buddhist teachings that obviously informed also his meditation.
Mm-hmm.
We do also know that David Lynch returned to the Bible for inspiration during Inland Empire the way he had for Eraser. He said that.
We do?
Yes.
Oh, okay, well now
David
we
Lynch
do.
has said that.
That's...
It was the public we.
The public we.
Yes.
Everybody.
So there is a sense of spirituality in this film, and I can see it.
I can see it too.
Even more than Eraserhead. Eraserhead, I've always kind of questioned if it was all based on a Bible quote. But if you tell me it's all based, Inland Empire is all based on that quote about the spider and the dreamer, I'm like, yeah, I can see that.
So, but that's the thing. Like, does he say like specifically the spider and the dreamer for the like the Bible thing that's inspired him, or is that
those
just
two different
speculation?
things?
Okay.
The Hindu Upanishads.
I see.
Yeah, that's the Upanishads
Okay.
versus the Bible. So he used both. He used multiple
both.
religious texts.
Very well.
But he did seek that sort of spiritual mindset when it came to this film.
Okay, very well. I think that being more the script on it, like saying like it came from this zone, as opposed towards one random gamble, throw it at the dartboard.
He literally
maybe it's the Bible.
gave a quote from the Upanishads to guide it. But I think it also doesn't really spoil anything, but it does give you a sense of the ethos and philosophy that went into it. Especially the idea of making the movie. He made the movie like a spider weaving a web. You know? He's just believing at the end it's going to come across as the web it needs to be. But it's just a spider releasing filament. That's what he's doing.
I'm getting big craving for Spider-Man now.
I'm getting big craving for... I was going to say big cravings for spiders, but I think spiders are gross.
Delicious.
I would not want to eat them. How they pop in your mouth like grapes. Anyway...
no, that's probably like a little crunch, like crunchy grapes.
Little crunchy grapes. Grapes can be crunchy. Anyway... On the use of the digital film, like I'd mentioned before, there are some who interpret the use of the commercial-grade cameras possibly being informative on the way this feels. The critic Dennis Lim, writing for Slate, described the film as a 3-hour waking nightmare that derives both its form and its content from the splintering psyche of a troubled Hollywood actress. The medium is that of home movies, viral video, and pornography. The everyday media detritus we associate more with intimate or private viewing experiences than communal ones. So the sort of feeling almost of a voyeuristic experience watching this, that you're watching something that's meant to be more private than it really is, through the use of those video cameras. Also is encountering some feminist readings of the film. There's an article written by Cameron Crane in particular for 25 Years Later that fits this, where he links in the ideas of the woman with the dual identity or fractured identity. This is the third iteration of that. We've had Patricia Arquette playing Renee and Alice in Lost Highway. We had Naomi Watts with Betty and Diane, Laura Haring with Rita and Camilla, both in Mulholland Drive, and then now we have Nikki Grace and Sue being played by Laura Dern, the woman who's been fractured. And he takes the idea of a woman in trouble not to be about a particular woman or a particular instance, a specific woman, but more the idea, universality of the feeling of a woman in trouble being more the subject matter. Quote, Lynch's film should be seen as a commentary on being a woman in a patriarchal world and a critique of the film industry. The article goes on to quote Sartre, de Beauvoir, and compares the dread in the film to the dread of living as a woman under male gaze. Obviously, this is a male author. We ourselves are male commentators, so we are not obviously privy to what it is like to be a woman living in America, let alone just a woman in general. But do you think that this view of Inland Empire being about the feelings of women feeling unsafe in a patriarchal world, do you find that reading fits Inland Empire for you?
I think for the most part it does, but mostly in the latter half of the film. In the former half of the film, there still are individuals that are male that cast the lead, but it seems more coincidental, if you will. There doesn't seem to be much sort of like content that would push against our protagonist until, again, the latter half. I also say that it's interesting whether it does add on or add off. I think it adds on to have, say, for example, Zabriskie's character to sort of like come in and be the one to forewarn about the world to come.
Right.
Is very notable for that overall viewing.
So she's a woman who's experienced the world and knows a lot, and she's able to pass her wisdom on.
Yes, and kind of like push away the lack of experience, if you will, that whenever she like presses something and then she's countered with is like, no, you don't realize, like, that's not how it's gonna go. This
is definitely a very female-centric film in the sense of the source of wisdom and spiritual vision is from this female neighbor character. And then obviously Nikki playing the main role of the protagonist, the lost girl being either the person saved or possibly the person who the story even all revolves around. There are male characters and there are interests in there, but generally speaking, the women have more agency and more control in this film.
Yes.
Which is, again, refreshing and unique to see in a film landscape where that often is not the case. Also, the author wrote that the Phantom, quote, presses the former on the fact that he is looking for an opening. What we get instead is a pure form of masculinity, the assertion of a kind of pure masculine desire, to find an opening. For what? To what end? It doesn't matter. I understand. This is what men do. Look for an opening. Indeed, the Phantom represents the darkest impulses of man, the tendency to be a creep, to take pleasure in the degradation of women, to have a laugh about it, and you can't simply shoot that dead. Do you find the Phantom representing masculinity, the idea of finding an opening in some way being that masculinity, do you find that compelling or not? Because I'm mixed.
I'm mixed on it, but mostly because of the fact of the reflective nature of the overall entity, the one in which, like, say, her face becomes fixated onto it and then becomes twisted. It seems a bit more personal to her than it is for an external force.
You could also maybe argue that's the way he sees her. He's mocking her. He's doing the sort of thing where it's his idea of her versus the real self of her.
Yeah.
There could be an idea of that. I think there's an argument to be had there. The author here goes on to say that you could take any man you want from the film, whether it's the husband or the confessor or whatever precisely he's supposed to be, and you find the woman treated as object, whether it's a piece of property or an object of study or whatever. So the idea that the Mr. K isn't necessarily interested in helping her, he's more studying her. And that all of the different men here involved are not necessarily really having the women's interest at heart. I think I get pushed against that a little bit with Smithy. I feel like he genuinely seems like he's trying to contact the lost girl and also trying to be helpful and useful in the story.
Okay.
I'm not as inclined to believe that he is using the woman from what we see, unless I'm forgetting something. So I struggle with that. And then also the jackrabbit permutations that we see, even though in Rabbits, Jackrabbit seems to be hiding a secret that might be harmful to women. In Inland Empire, he seems to be transforming into people to specifically stop the Phantom and to equip either Smithy or, in the long term, Nikki with the power to destroy that.
Yeah.
So I find it a little hard to completely gel this interpretation when I get down to the specific characters.
I think that the flexibility that comes from Zabrisky's character when it comes down to, like, interpreting the tale from both the male and female sides, boy and girl, in that respect, makes it feel like these are more so, like, as far as, like, the Jackrabbit or the Phantom goes, feel more non-feeling and more so goal-oriented than they are anything against this character. It seems like, as far as our main character goes, it seems that she's just been sort of thrown into the storm, and we're going to see which end she pops out.
And again, maybe you could argue that that is symptomatic of the experience many women feel.
Yes.
I do not know if I can say that so much from my own experiences. I don't feel like I really understand enough to say that. Obviously, then we're interpreting the shooting of the Phantom as being a possible hopeful ending of a release from patriarchy, a release from control, a release from that masculine force that would seek to control, and instead a form of freedom then for the lost girl who gets to leave. But then again, the lost girl's form of hope is returning to that family. So obviously it's not as simple as saying that Inland Empire is against men, because obviously her happy ending is to return to her husband and son, who are important men in her life. So it's more the sense of the men who would seek to control are the opposition here. I think it's an interesting theory, and I can kind of understand it, again, through the lens of a woman in trouble being the filtering point of this movie, being the tagline. I think that identifying this movie's anxiety as a specifically female anxiety, there's things that open up when you do that. Things that open up. There's also people who talk about the movie in terms of identity and self. Essayist Ashley Harris noted, quote, "It seems that through Inland Empire, Lynch could be suggesting that the idea of the self is one that we can never realize, just as Nikki Grace, played by Laura Dern, feels herself becoming more of the character she is portraying. Perhaps this is Lynch's way of expressing that there is so much fluidity in the world that it is hard to discern between what makes up ourselves as opposed to that which influences us. Perhaps also Lynch is suggesting that there is no difference between influence and personhood, and that which influences us merges entirely with who we are as a person. Of course, Lynch may also not be posturing any of those notions. These ideas make up my relationship with Inland Empire and how it may be interpreted." End quote. So, long story short, this interpretation of it being a musing on identity and the way in which identity is made up of the things around us that influence us, and you may not be able to necessarily separate the true self from the outside world that shapes you. It's, again, more of a reflection on identity itself, rather than using identity to talk about life as a woman, or to talk about the film industry like Mulholland Drive a lot of times associated. It is more identity specifically as the focus. What do you think? Like, if you were to say Inland Empire is about identity, do you think it is suggesting the idea of identity being very malleable and almost non-existent? Or do you think there is a sort of true self still in this movie?
I think that, honestly, I could spin it either way. Like, when it comes down to it, like, it is a goal of, like, at the very least in the background, of trying to get some structure on reality itself and finding the reality of oneself and what character they're currently playing in that very instance. I feel that can be garnered. I do also kind of look at, say, for example, interactions that are happening later in the film, and I'm wondering to myself on if it is something that is going to be an accomplishable goal of finding oneself, especially if, like, following the narrative's logic, that there has been failures before in, say, for example, making these remakes. Maybe the overall trials and errors of finding self and understanding the faults that could overall lead to a lack of conclusion there, or not being able to find oneself and just being thrown back into the overall storm again for whatever generations are to come. I think there's opportunity inside there for this.
I think what's so nice about movies like this and situations like this specifically is that you can interpret identity to be the main focus of the film, or it could still be in service to any of the other commentaries or topics you may think the movie's more interested in. If the movie is more about the situation of being a woman or the critique of being an actor, you could use the way in which the woman loses her sense of self in patriarchy as important, or the actor losing themselves in their role as important. Identity doesn't have to be the main focus, but it can be for different viewers. And that's where, if someone who has gone through depersonalization or derealization psychologically, I could see them realistically making that connection with this film in a way that I can't, as that I have not gone through those sort of experiences. But anyone who's ever had those sort of feelings of not feeling necessarily like one person, or let alone someone with dissociative identity disorder, I could see getting something out of this film.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just that they're going to be filtering it through a different lens, and these details are going to mean different things and maybe appear bigger than other details that stand out to us. So I think that's very intriguing and fun.
Almost becomes a Rorschach test at that point.
And I think Inland Empire is especially equipped for that. As was Rabbits, which this obviously repurposed. Is this more cryptic than Rabbits?
This has rabbits inside of it.
So, yes.
Yes.
Okay. And I have one last interpretation I want to share. This one goes in a kind of different direction from the others, and it's unclear to me from looking at the source how much of this was meant to be genuine versus almost a bit of a troll or joke.
Okay.
I am interpreting this person to mean what they are saying, but their tone can get very strong. So there is this blog by this person named Pliskin Boone. I don't think they're any more active. But at the beginning of this article, this giant analysis they did, in all caps, they have these like disclaimers. And it says in all caps, despite years of subjective Lynchian theory from film critics and academics alike, Lynch films can actually be rationally and objectively interpreted, which is just the way Lynch originally conceived them, and what he has said all along. It is others who have incorrectly labeled Lynch's films as subjective dreams, as I will prove. And a lot of the tone early on says that he's going to tell you things about these movies, because he also did Mulholland Drive analysis. He's going to tell you things about these movies that if people knew what he's talking about, someone might want to take you out.
It's
almost conspiratorial in the tone, and I can't tell what the mentality was going in. However, despite the way the blog appears and the way that some of the wording is, I find a lot of the ideas that are being put forward here to be pretty interesting. And so I wanted to highlight a few of them and kind of run them by you in your interpretation here. So in general, the idea that Pliskin Boone puts forward is that the movie can be interpreted literally and very specifically. It's not open to interpretation. It is the story of the lost girl. She is in a Polish asylum for murdering two people. Inland Empire is her story. Axon N is her mind. Everything is seen through her eyes. The lost girl married a Polish man and became pregnant. But the husband believed he was incapable of fathering children. She had an illegal backstreet abortion that scarred her physically, and her husband left anyway and began living with another woman. The lost girl became a sex worker to support herself, became mentally unwell through all the trauma and guilt, blaming her husband, killed him at 9:45 and his lover soon after, and then repressed the memory and reality of the killings. So the rest of the movie is fragmented and told out of order in different ways and different views because her mind is fragmented at this moment. And it is the process of these memories surfacing and her fighting against them. The visitor and Mr. K and other people like that are representations of therapists or others trying to reason with her, trying to get a little bit left. So when Mr. K says, it won't be much longer, I think we're almost done, right? It's the idea that he's almost going to make a breakthrough. She's going to realize what's going on. She's going to accept the truth. But the Phantom, in this interpretation, is not the bad guy. In this interpretation, the Phantom is her conscience. The view here is that it's not like the Phantom was an abusive husband in the past. It's more that her conscience, she feels beat up by it. So he takes it to be the idea that when she shoots her conscience, she's trying to remove that last bit of feeling of guilt. So when it morphs onto the face, and then the face distorts, it is again that killing of the reflection. It's killing of the truth and the self. This idea is so different from anything else I had encountered, but it goes to show how much Inland Empire can be molded.
Yes.
This mostly works. Like, if you view the lost girl as the real person, when she's in her room watching TV and crying, it's a metaphor for her being in her cell or being in her placement at the asylum. And she's using all these different characters and scenarios as representations in her mind, her subconscious, of repressing the guilt of what happened. So you get things like the ketchup stain. That's a flash image of the murder she had committed, but that's why it goes to her face in the blood stain, is it's going back to that's who did it. So it takes a lot of the other assumptions we've worked through here and flips them around. I don't know what this person, when they made this blog, was exactly like, how genuine they're being or how much is exaggeration, but they went in depth. This originally was like, I had like almost 30 pages of bullet point notes just from this one source. And I not all of it tracks. I don't think all of this works. But what do you make of this interpretation in general, Professor, of the lost girl committing the murders? This film is her repressing the memories and trying to work through them. They also note then that Nikki Grace is the Hollywood fantasy, this sort of idea of escapism. Being in the film is her way of getting out of it, but also her mind is replaying itself, the axon N, the recurring script, because it's her brain trying to process the guilt and trauma.
I think that for the most part, I do see, again, you gave me a fairly amount of, broad terms to work with.
Yeah, there's
here.
a lot more specifics if you want to dive into them later.
Yeah. I would say that for the most part, it's a very interesting interpretation. I think that it is a valid interpretation, and I can see someone seeing it through this lens. It's just probably something internally with me that kind of looks at the situation and being like, an asylum situation with the doctors and everything. And it kind of almost muddles the emotions for me. It kind of feels down,
almost cheapens.
Just because I've kind of seen it before, and just to have it again be inside of one person's crazy head, if you will, with more so just that sort of flair, but at the same time not much to be given from the character themselves. It's and
this is where I think trying to make
down the fanfare.
If you try to make everything fit a logical narrative, this is the kind of thing that can result. And I feel like that's where it hurts, again, the potential quality of the experience for me as well, is that if I interpret this film always like this, and I'm like, there's only one truth, I have found it, this is the answer, it's all in the head of a person who's in denial with psychological issues. Bam, 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 I did it. That to me doesn't feel like a victory so much as oh, that's it. And it's interesting because in the blog, Pliskin Boone says that David Lynch is one of the best writers of all time, best directors of all time. He's genius. People don't recognize it because they want to believe it's all subjective when it isn't. And it's I feel the opposite. I think the beauty of his work is the subjectivity. So the moment you if you were able to 100% prove that this is true, that diminishes the film for me. That doesn't make it better.
Now, we also have to question inside of Pliskin Boone's environment. I mean, whenever it comes to, say, for example, broader statements when it is like which one is more favorable and which is not,
Yeah.
I think is like very much dependent on that environment. I know, like I mentioned before inside the podcast, some of the material that we're going over, I only have really a small pool of individuals that I think I would be able to get into this area. I can see where someone might have none of those. And so having that frustrating thing in which like you're trying to show people these fantastic works and that's either the explanation to sort of like wave it away is like, it's all subjective and so on.
It's all too weird. It's all too,
Yeah, I can see where like the passion comes in, where it's like, no, it can be understood. Just please come back to this and just like check this out. I promise you that we can work this out together, but elsewise, this is some great stuff. I can see where that sort of like thing can come from. Now, again, I'm reaching into like someone's potential narrative that I have no knowledge
we don't
on.
know. We don't know the person. And I think that even though I don't agree with the foundation, I don't agree with the all caps message at the beginning that these movies are objective. A lot of great ideas came through this analysis that work. Like, the idea of the red light being the red light district, the red light area, again, the sex work. That's why the red light is so impactful. The literal, if the phantom is the conscience, he's walking toward her with a red light bulb in his mouth, reminding her that she was a sex worker, that she is denying and repressing. That works as an analysis point. Now, obviously, how much you think being a sex worker should be something to feel guilty over is a personal moral situation. And I don't necessarily know if David Lynch even would say that's something to feel guilty about or not. But for this character, it's possible this character feels guilty about it and is repressing it because the moment they acknowledge that they did that, it brings up the other memories that are unpleasant. I could see that. And the ending credits with Sinner Man, he takes it to be the people on death row, the idea of the Sinner Man being the people on death row, and then along with a lot of the workers, the locomotion, the lyrics in the locomotion representing sex work. Quote, "You'll get to like it if you give it a chance. It's easy as learning your ABCs. You got to swing your hips." And those are lyrics in the locomotion. So interpreting every aspect of this movie along a very narrow narrative, it forces some things to fit unnaturally, sure, but it also reveals different areas where, like, the locomotion could be about sex work. It could be. And that's an interesting way to view it.
Do the locomotion with
And then at
me.
the end, this also, again, is one of the few interpretations where the ending's not a good thing. Because in this one, she shoots her conscience, and then the lost girl, by escaping her room, basically has fled reality. She lives in a dream world where she never had the abortion, she never killed her husband, they can be back together again, when in reality, again, like Lost Highway, she might be put to death. And that's where the ending credits could fit in, with the death row idea, and it's like, that's pretty solid.
Yes.
I was surprised when I went through it how much I ended up thinking it works. Because when I first saw it, I was like, this does not sound like it's going to make sense. I was put off by the tone at the beginning, but it's like, no, there's something to it. Inland Empire is one of those things that you can approach it from almost any vantage point and find something to connect.
And then you saw their typeface. Da, 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 da. And now you're a believer.
I'm not a full
Da, da, da,
believer.
da, da, da.
I just think it's an
Da, da,
entertaining...
trace. Da, 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 da,
There'll be no trace of this part of the podcast when I edit it out.
No! Let me exist through my woes.
Through your woes.
My woes.
The last thing that I want to talk about in this podcast of magnitude, truly fitting for Inland Empire, I would say, is I want to talk about the remaster. And this is where, it's a niche within a niche. I don't know how many people that even care about Inland Empire, care about this remaster a lot, and it hasn't come out yet. So I want to preface all of this by the sense of any opinions I express are from ignorance. All I've seen are screenshots on Twitter and the trailer that was released by Janus Films. It is not out yet. I have not been able to see it. I want to see the remaster. I do want to say, though, given what I know, I am worried about the remaster. And I'm worried about it because I think this is effectively going to replace the original. The original's been out of print for a long time. If this becomes the main way people have access to this movie for years coming forward, if this is the version that ends up on streaming platforms, this is going to be Inland Empire for people. And unless they preserve on the disc the option to view the original version, which I doubt, it's gone. And that's what worries me. It's not lost media, but it's very close to it. It's going to be overwritten media. So that worries me.
Yes. As far as like items go, as far as what I'm aware of the remaster. I'm almost kind of curious in the respects of, say, for example, like the grandmother. Like beforehand, when we saw the grandmother in the David Lynch catalog, there was like two very separate reactions to the overall ending.
We watched the DVD version at first from the green box set.
With TV calibration in its correct set.
Yes. Then we watched the Blu-ray version of the Criterion collection of the David Lynch short films.
And the overall, like, ending of it with this overall strange Eldritch root system that is very much more apparent.
Yeah. Both have a value.
Both have a value. It's just the question of, since Inland Empire was so difficult to sort of get your hands on and so on, and it doesn't seem like there's reproductions of the media going in, it's the fact that we can't have that comparison.
That's the concern. I'm fortunate that I have this DVD of the movie, but not everyone has that or will have access to it in the future. And just with this new version coming out, it doesn't necessarily mean that the old versions are going to be any easier to obtain. I don't know if the cost will even go down. It is a very uncertain point. As far as the specs, for those who are much more knowledgeable, maybe the specs will make sense. The process by which this is being remastered is that it's being upscaled in UHD, so ultra high definition, 4K resolution. David Lynch gave it a new color pass, adding a layer of grain and remastering the audio with the film's original mixtures, Ron Eng and Dean Hurley. The original upscaled HD footage from the editing process was first downscaled back to standard definition to discard false detail, then converted to 4K using an AI upscaling algorithm. Publications have noted that there might appear to be jiggery motion, since as part of the remastering process, 6 frames are missing for every second of film. 12 frames when counting the field rate of interlaced source material. So it has to use this AI program to artificially upscale it to 4K ultra high definition, but in the process is going to be losing frames at a very minor level, but still it might appear a bit different when it's in motion. These things have me a little nervous. The screenshots and trailers so far show it to be brighter in a lot of areas.
It's okay. They'll refill the frames with images like from Dumbland. They'll just put in between frames, and you're just going to see some flashes of David Lynch's drawn interpretations of all the characters.
I worry because I think that a lot of the potential beauty that I find in my favorite David Lynch film might be diminished. I love Inland Empire because it looks the way it does right now.
Is it strange that overall when I see something such as this, even if I can see something being diminished, I almost look forward to the potential outcomes of either diminishment or
I'm
rise.
in the minority, most likely. I think most people are excited to have this movie available. I'm glad more people can see the movie because, again, I love this movie.
And I would like our listeners to experience it as well in case it may be difficult to get their hands on.
But because it's probably, again, if I am wrong, if they have access to the original footage on the Blu-ray disc and it looks the same chunky handheld camera quality it has now, amen. I am always for options. But if it's no longer available, if the other version goes out of print completely, and this is what we're left with, it will replace Inland Empire, and I don't like that. So I want to highlight how David Lynch talked about the movie's visuals before, when it first came out, and then how he talked about it most recently in that AV Club interview. And I want to highlight the black and white, just next to each other, the difference between them. So, from the Inland Empire wiki, although David Lynch acknowledged that the low quality he achieved with the PD-150 camera could be seen as ugly, quote unquote, that's his word, ugly, and also admitted that there were higher quality digital cameras he could have used to shoot in HD, he liked the lower quality, which reminded him of 1930s films. He enjoyed the fact that the camera captured less information because, quote, if there's some question about what you're seeing or some dark corner, the mind can go dreaming. I 100% stand by this reasoning. It is how I feel about Inland Empire. There are moments where things are dark and the resolution is so unclear that my mind is allowed to go to places that otherwise can't. It leaves a greater sense of unknown. The handheld quality of it, the fact that this was commercial grade camera in the time period, it makes it feel almost voyeuristic, homemade. It makes it feel raw. It makes it feel, again, like there's something could happen at any given moment. It doesn't feel like any other movie I'm watching, and I love that about it. Nothing looks and feels like Inland Empire. Versus So that's me, my analysis. But if we compare how Lynch talked back then to how he talks now, when he was describing revisiting the movie, and rewatching the DVD for the AV Club interview, quote, I became so depressed because I was watching a DVD and some scenes were so dark I couldn't see them. And I thought, well, this is a catastrophe that this is out in the world. And I got very depressed. But then I got a chance to fix it. I saw what Inland Empire used to be, and I see what it is now. And to me, there's a huge jump in quality. I saw more focus, deeper colors. With Inland Empire, it's like, here's the film you made, and it used to look this way. And there was a little bit of sadness in your heart, because, in a way, the look of it took away from going into the world. It blocked a little bit of it. It had a tendency to keep calling attention to itself. Now I think it's easier to go into that world. And I disagree with David Lynch right now. If I watch the remaster and it turns out amazing, and it improves on the mystery, it improves on the darkness, it improves on... But everything he's saying makes me believe it's not going to be that way, because he is talking about the movie that I love and saying that it is a disaster that it's out in the world.
I love the fact that potentially it could be the bigger question of how much do you read into the fog in the Shadow of Colossus?
On that note, for those who care about video games, I am on the team that does not like the remake of Shadow of the Colossus. I prefer the original PS2 or the PS3 remaster of Shadow of the Colossus. I do think the remake lost some of the quality, but like with Inland Empire, it risks replacing the original, because now this is the version that likely would get ported to future consoles, would be the PS4 version of Shadow of the Colossus.
Thanks to the overall limitations of the overall hardware. And
the game would chug because of the movement of these beasts on the PS2, and that added to the feeling of their size. And again, the fog, there was the lack of clarity added to the mystery. And there's something beautiful in that gets lost. I vibe so strongly with 2003 David Lynch, 2005 David Lynch, that when I hear him at battle with his 20-year later self, I know which side I'm on. If time-traveling David Lynch's were at war, I would go immediately side with the one from those 2000s. The one that was making Dumbland on Flash and making rabbits in his backyard and going to read the Upanishads and then off the cuff, off the fly, just making Inland Empire and talking about how beautiful it was to make something so obscure and mysterious. Versus the one now who says, it's really sad that movie exists out there on DVD in this format. I wish I didn't have to look at this horrible footage.
I feel like I disagree with David Lynch enough in general that I don't even want to be involved in this war. I'll just go, like, I'll
be a neutral party.
Just write me to say whether or not you're okay by the end of it.
But art is at stake, Professor.
Cool.
We'll know more of actually which Lynch you side with when we get to the return. That's going to be part of it, too.
That's going to be part of it, too. It's ever-changing.
Ever-changing. And not that there's only two Lynches, you know. Inside you, there are two David Lynches.
Get them out.
Get them out. Help. Just some other random things, by the way. When asked in the interview about potential special features, if, for example, Inland Empire got added to the Criterion Collection, which a lot of times has great special features, he was asked about that in the interview, and he said, quote, "Those are the things I call bells and whistles. And you know, bells and whistles, there are novelty stores on Hollywood Boulevard that sell those. It's the film. That's what's important, the film. And the rest is like, you know, golly day. If people say, okay, I can get the thing, but if there's no bells and whistles, then I'm not going to buy it, that's fine. But for me, the bells and whistles are almost ridiculous and absurd. Sorry. You get to work so hard on the film to be the film in a certain way, and its quality and all that. And that's the thing you're going for." Again, I am choosing not to fight with this David Lynch. I don't like the fact that when he was asked about special features, he dismisses special features as ridiculous and absurd and says it doesn't matter, you just need the movie. Honestly, it kind of worries me because one of the special features on the DVD for Inland Empire is more things that happened. That's another feature-length movie, length of Inland Empire content.
Now he
could have told me whether that's going to be there or not.
Now, my question is whether or not, say, for example, does he consider that like special feature, or is he just more so
and maybe
generalizing
if we're
like
taking just the stuff that's added?
Because remember, this is still the mad person that maybe like the opinion changed, but still a mad person that threw like a bunch of Twin Peaks from Fire Walk with Me straight onto Tumblr as a premiere with the missing pieces.
I don't know.
Like, what does he consider that missing pieces? What does he consider
And
like
then,
the
again,
things
maybe-
that happen? Again, another parallel with other David Lynch works.
Maybe the key is the word added. It has to be something new that's added. He doesn't want any new things added. But it's just, to me, such a dismissive answer, because if someone loves your work, David Lynch, enough to buy the Criterion Collection version, those movies ain't cheap. They're like $40, sometimes more than that.
Kalil-
If someone's willing to buy that and they want to support your work and they want to hear like interviews or behind the scenes or like anecdotes and stuff, I don't know, maybe don't insult that.
Kalil, I'm pretty sure, like, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure we're anti-absolutist, that whenever, like, it comes to, like, someone who says that this is the way of things, we're just, no.
No, and that's
No.
it's the tone. It's the tone. Using the
tone.
term ridiculous and absurd. It's one thing to say that he doesn't know what special features are on there and he's not particularly worried about it. That's one thing. That's a valid thing.
It's showing the passion behind this.
But it doesn't feel like he really cares about the product that the viewer is going to get. He just cares that Inland Empire doesn't look as bad as it used to for him. And I get it. David Lynch always makes art for himself. I get it. But it's just, I don't know. I think the special features do matter to some people. And it's something kind of to celebrate your work. The special features are there to celebrate you. Criterion Collections function the way that, like, a special edition of like a classic novel works, where they have anecdotes from different thinkers and different interpretations and essays and studies that you might find like in a Norton Classics edition of a book. And it's like half the book. I remember buying like Frankenstein, and half of the Frankenstein copy is essays about Frankenstein. I didn't read all of them, but I think it's cool that exists. I think it's cool that we can have media where there's a whole chunk of extra content to dive into if you want more, if you want people talking about it in interviews and interesting things. And to just wave that away as like a novelty shop thing, I don't know. I feel like that doesn't gel with me.
It doesn't gel with me much either. And again, maybe it's also the curious nature of how we see things, such as like a slice of David Lynch off of something such as the Blu-rays. Is that
you and I spent podcasts talking about special features, so
yeah,
obviously we know what side we're on.
Like we were all
multiple. That's why I said podcasts, plural. Anyway. Also, in the interview, on a much lighter note, but also weird note, in the interview, David Lynch expressed interest in possibly revisiting Dune at some point. The first time I want to say it's the first time he said that since Dune. He almost never wants to talk about it in interviews, but as they were talking, he just kind of passively mentioned, like, yeah, if there was a freak chance that I could somehow touch up, find old footage of Dune and make a better cut, yeah, there's something to that maybe. But he just said it would never happen.
It might just turn out that story of the boy that walks through the door and reflects and comes through, it was actually like a self-story, like David
Lynch opened the door to Inland Empire and then Shadow Lynch emerged.
Yep, and no, who knows? Like, he opened the door at one point or another. Maybe it's the evil David Lynch, maybe it's the good David Lynch that we have at this point in our timeline. I don't know what.
Whatever one is in this interview, I don't like as much. I mean, I don't know.
Bring back evil Lynch.
I want to be clear. I have a lot of respect for David Lynch. Inland Empire is one of my top 4 favorite movies of all time. It's unlikely to change out of my top 10, at least, ever.
Yeah.
I love Inland Empire, and I think the fact that he made this is incredible. I only get upset here when I hear him, in my opinion, disparage his own work. In 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, when he was using that digital camera technology, he was passionate about it, and he believed in it. And this is the version of Inland Empire he put out into the world largely on his own.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a personal betrayal for me to hear him go against that. And of course, people are allowed to change. Of course, people are allowed to grow and evolve. I don't see this as a positive change, though, and I think it does a bit of a disservice to the movie that I love so much. And to see it get replaced by a version that, again, potentially, haven't seen it, only seen screenshots in a trailer.
Can't emphasize this enough.
But it's brightening the dark spots, it's smoothing over things, it's clarifying things, and unless we get some eldritch horror like in The Grandmother, I don't know what there is to be revealed that is better than the mystery. And that's, again, a whole, you want to get my thoughts on David Lynch's films in general, it's that old adage, what you reveal has to be better than the mystery. It has to be better than the mystery. And I don't know if in Inland Empire's case he could give me anything like that, because I love that mystery. Hello, this is Kalil from the future.
The Unplugged Professor and I actually just got back from a road trip that brought us through many of the locations of Twin Peaks. We visited Snoqualmie Falls, the Tweeds Cafe, the Runette Bridge, the former Sheriff Truman Sheriff Building, Police Department Building, and we have pictures on Twitter if you're interested for that. Otherwise, along with this trip, I actually managed to get to see the remaster of Inland Empire. When we recorded this episode, we didn't know that would work with our trip, but it did, so I am recording this like 2 days before upload with some updates. So regarding the Inland Empire remaster, having seen it in theaters myself, I will say that I do prefer the original DVD cut. The remaster, to my eyes, looks clearer in some spots. There are scenes where things have been brightened up, smoothed over. There are, particularly within a lot of close-up shots of Laura Dern, there'll be moments where it looks more HD, quote-unquote. But it's not even. There are some spots where it'll cut, even right after a more HD-looking scene, into something that looks pretty much the same as it did before, at least to my untrained eyes. I'm sure someone who's way better with noticing visual fidelity would have way better things to say, but from my vantage point, it looks like it's uneven. There are spots that look really clean, and there's parts that look basically the same. The professor was unable to join me for this movie, so I can't speak for his opinion, but I prefer the original DVD cut still, because the remaster has less artifacting. That's the number one difference, I would say. If you are someone who has seen Inland Empire before and like the DVD cut, and you like the way that it sometimes looks like the visuals are almost glitching out or having trouble like keeping up with the light and the darkness, some of the weird sort of visual elements that can happen as residue from that camera at the time, this remaster might disappoint you in the sense that it is cleaner. 90 to 95% of people are probably not going to care about this. Inland Empire is still Inland Empire. It is still weird. It is still confusing. A lot of the odd feelings associated with the film, from like intense close-ups and strange shots, they still exist. The film has not had any scenes added or removed or changed from what I can tell, but there is less artifacting. I also think on the positive side, though, the audio might be better. Now, I saw this at a theater, literally in Missoula, Montana, by the way. Shout out to the Roxy Theater in Missoula, Montana. Amazing getting to see Inland Empire in literally the place where David Lynch was born and grew up. But I'm pretty sure the audio might still be better in the remaster. I just can't tell if it's the theater quality or if it's the remaster audio. Either way, I noticed more of the musics, more of the sound editing, and it got to the point where there were some intense moments I had kind of left the theater strategically to avoid really loud noises, because it was starting to get to be a lot for me personally, as someone who really gets into Inland Empire. While watching it, I also had a couple of things bouncing through my mind from this episode of the podcast. One thing is the idea of Inland Empire not having one consistent meaning. I wanted to bring up some points that I think add to that idea, that it might have been even intentional. I think it's not a stretch to say that Inland Empire is at least in part about confusion, and it's about missing context. There's a part where director Kinsley is talking to Nikki and talking to the actor for Billy, and he's kind of rambling on about how there's this thing they found within the script, right? But before he gets to the story of the old folktale, Director Kingsley says, sometimes we're not told the full story. Kind of alluding to, in my mind, to the idea almost from a, again, fourth wall breaking side, that Inland Empire maybe not giving you the full story. Also, we get Nikki's husband in her timeline telling Billy's actor that people don't say what they mean sometimes. That sometimes people don't exactly say what they mean. Combine that with not getting the full story, and maybe it makes sense why Inland Empire resists having one interpretation that's complete, because you're not told every single thing, or even what it even means. And then you got Bucky J, the joke character that David Lynch plays. So much of the gag with him is misunderstanding and miscommunication due to a lack of clarity, that they can't quite hear or distinguish what's being said or done. This, again, could be a thematic element about Inland Empire being about confusion. Now, these things could not relate at all. It could be incidental. Bucky J might have been completely improvised. But throughout Inland Empire, there's this sort of vibe that the audience isn't being given everything. You're not being told what everything means. And I don't think Nikki Grace has any clue what's going on either. I think it's a film that it really entertains confusion. I was also thinking a bit more about the feminist readings of this film, and a little bit more fuel to the fire as I was watching it, that I think these theories really hold up. I was looking a lot at Billy's lines to Susan in the film within the scope of the script, dismissing Susan when she says she's going to the gym, and he's like, is that gym with a G or gym with a J? A lot of his attitude seems to be almost coercive to kind of push her in a certain direction. That's not to say that Susan or Nikki or other women in the story don't have moments where they are maybe proactive or aggressive or in some ways showing more agency. But a lot of times it does seem like the men in this film are a little more manipulative and a little more gross feeling, whether it's the script of the film or the events of Inland Empire in the Nikki world or in the Polish world. There's this consistent element, right? A lot of the stories that Nikki's character is telling Mr. K are about these different women who have been hurt by men. Cases where the men might have been advancing on women in very inappropriate ways or are abusive or are harmful, and women having to fight back the only way they can. And although the women show violence and it's kind of disturbing, it seems like a lot of times, at least for my reading, the film is sympathetic toward these female characters. It's the men who are the aggressors and the women are having to fight back in their own way. So I think the feminist readings of the film hold up very consistently throughout the movie in a way that I noticed a bit more in this recent viewing. And then lastly, as my note from the future here rescinds into the ether once more, I wanted to say the theater experience was really fun. If you ever get to see Inland Empire in person, I would highly recommend you take that opportunity. There's a certain intensity that can happen to being around other people during this movie that I really enjoy. Generally, my audience was quiet in Missoula, but there were moments of laughter that I thought were interesting because I've never found Inland Empire to be a particularly funny movie. But I can understand a bit better why people would laugh at certain parts now that I've been in the room during those parts and people have laughed. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then, in case you're worried that Inland Empire with the remaster, that too much has changed, don't worry. When the movie ended, well, it was going into the ending, going into the Cinnamon credits, when it kind of faded out, there was someone in the audience who very loudly, audibly yelled, "What the F?" I don't swear, but what the F word? And very loudly just confused at what was going on. So regardless of whether you prefer the artifacting of the original or prefer the cleanliness and clean-cut editing of the remaster, either way, the movie is still an absolute mess, and nobody has a clue what's going on. Anyway, with that being said, back to our regularly scheduled programming.
On that note, I have two wonderful and strange questions of the week for you.
Shoot them at me.
I'm going to grab my metaphorical gun, and you're going to have my metaphorical face on you because you are the Phantom, and I'm going to go bang bang.
Pardon?
At the bar at Twin Peaks.
Pardon?
Question number 1. How has Inland Empire changed how you view David Lynch as an artist? It's the last time I can ask that.
It's the last time you can.
At least for the films. Maybe the return I
for
can.
the films, aren't you going to ask that for like the pieces? That
I don't know if I
out?
will.
Okay.
Did I ask that for the Blue Velvet? Oh, not Blue Velvet, but the missing pieces for I Walk With Me? I don't think so. Anyway, how has Inland Empire changed your view on David Lynch as an artist?
It hasn't really changed it, but more so refined my overall perspective that David Lynch can and will overall recycle things, but also can and will do whatever the hell he wants. Like, this is something that I think is the purest form of will do whatever the hell he wants. So, just because the overall format of it is drastically different from all of his other works, yet he still is bringing something very much his flavor to the table. So
This is not one of my questions, but just to spin off of that. Do you like Inland Empire?
that's the question, isn't it?
It is certainly the question that I just asked.
I like it as a piece of work. I like it as a piece of work. I like it in the respects that it exists. Is it something that I can find myself coming back to? Not really. But at the same time, like, if someone comes down the same rabbit hole as us, would I recommend it? Yes. It's in that strange existence where it's something I would not quantifiably see again for myself, but at the same time, I respect it. It's someone in the room that I respect.
Fair enough. If this turns out to be David Lynch's last film, if he does not make another film ever, discounting 18-hour films like The Return, if we go that route, how do you feel if this ends up being David Lynch's last film? What do you think of it as his last film?
Perfect. Like, genuinely, I think it's perfect. He's bringing in, as, like, the usual cast members that, well, not the usual. He would usually bring in past cast members into something that could overall help enhance his work, and very talented ones at that hand. It's something that is very notable that if someone sees it, I'm pretty sure it'll stick with them in some form or capacity. And at the end of the day, even though it may not be the present Lynch that may be satisfied with it, I think that there is something notable that in a point at a time inside of its own capsule, this was something that David Lynch put together, thought was better than this form of quality, so put it over here and made something at the time what seemed to be very special to him. And I think it's still very special to him, or elsewise he wouldn't go back to it thinking that he has to resuscitate it like it's some sort of corpse, like it somehow died along the years. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Listeners, next up, we're doing More Things That Happened, which
Wait.
is the expansive, what?
Inland Empire, yeah.
Yeah, the expanded scenes of Inland Empire, additional scenes of Inland Empire. I have never seen them, somehow. I love Inland Empire, and I don't think I ever watched the More Things That Happened, which is going to be perfect for this next upcoming podcast. After that, we are going to be venturing into the secret history of Twin Peaks very soon. That is the next thing planned on the docket. So, if you are wanting to procure that book, it is available widely wherever books are sold. And if you want to dust off the copy that you have on your shelf, maybe you read it a few years ago and you want a chance to reread it, we would encourage you to join us on that venture, because we are going to be diving straight into more rabbit holes, and I can only imagine the amount of things the professor can get into when it comes to the secret history of Twin Peaks.
And also on that note, say for example you have a busy lifestyle, stuff is going on for you or anything like that, there's also audiobook forms of the
Secret History of Twin Peaks, yeah.
There we go.
It's a book, yeah.
It's a book.
And the audio version's pretty good because they got some of the returning voice cast to voice characters. I won't obviously not spoil who, but there are going to be some returning Twin Peaks voices.
I've started flipping through it, and already I can let you know that I'm very excited to announce that Meriwether Lewis is a presence inside of the book.
Spoilers!
Spoilers, but you need it. You need it. You know you're wondering why, who, why.
The physical edition has got a great set of pictures, and just generally the presentation, it looks different than most books. It is worth owning the physical as well as the audio if you can afford both, because both have a place. They're both really nice.
And get yourself some nice Jacoby shades, perhaps.
Perhaps. Professor!
Hey.
We're at the end of the tunnel for David Lynch films. And then we're taking another tunnel that is Mark Frost's book.
It seems like we're just in the same tunnel.
Echo, 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 echo.
Let's rock.
Let's rock, let's rock, let's rock, let's rock.